The Final Chapter. Written by author g.k.parks. Narrated by Amber Hinson. Original music created by Andre E. Leodore 3000. Modified by Amber Hinson. 1. The pain radiated up my side. I couldn't move, and I couldn't breathe. If the man above me applied any more pressure to my ribs, I was sure they would break. As it was, I wasn't positive they wouldn't be bruised and sore for the next few days. Resisting the physical urge to panic and flail, I carefully considered my options before making a decision. I slapped my palm against the dingy red mat. Agent Michael Carver immediately released his grip and leaned back on his haunches. I took a deep breath and flattened out on the floor. No longer forced into an uncomfortable contortion, I shut my eyes and put my hands over my face as I attempted to shut out the world.
"You're distracted. Where's your head?"
Michael asked, laying on the mat next to me and staring up at the ceiling. We spent the early morning sparring in the FBI's gym.
"First of all, I've never managed to pin you in that hold before. And second, since when do you tap out?"
I sighed and moved my hands to my torso, gingerly assessing the area for tenderness. I'm having an off day. Plus, it's too early in the morning for hand-to-hand combat. He hadn't done any damage. Well, maybe just to my pride.
"Alexis."
He bumped his shoulder against mine.
"What's going on?"
Nothing. I considered sitting up, but that required too much energy. I'm just tired. I haven't been sleeping well lately.
"When was the last time you got laid?" he asked, and I kicked him in the shin. "That long, huh?"
He rubbed his leg.
"I only ask because you might be in need of some extracurricular stress relief."
Carver tended to flirt. He also tended to be a jackass, and sometimes he came off a little too pig-headed and misogynistic for his own good, despite my best efforts to knock some sense into him. But we were partnered together often enough that I considered him a friend and sometimes valued his opinion. However, this wasn't one of those times. Let me guess. You're offering.
"Maybe I would have, but you kicked me. So no, this well-formed male specimen is not available to be your plaything." He smirked. "Unless you ask nicely."
I rolled my eyes.
"In all seriousness, Alex?"
He offered a hand and helped me up.
"Is everything okay?"
Everything's fine. Maybe I'm coming down with something. Change of seasons makes most people sick, right? He didn't buy it, but when it came to interrogation techniques, he knew I wouldn't budge. We parted ways, heading off to the separate locker rooms to shower and dress for another fun-filled Monday at the Office of International Operations. I practically collided with him on my way out the door. My chest pressed against his, and he grabbed my shoulders, steadying me. From the look on his face, I knew he wouldn't leave well enough alone.
"Your head's still in the clouds, huh? Maybe I should have joined you in the shower."
"Maybe I'll report you to Jablonski for sexual harassment, and you can spend the next few days watching the sensitivity training videos and brushing up on proper social etiquette with the legal department," I retorted. First, he tried to break my ribs, and now he was busting my chops. Hell of a way to start the day. Looking appropriately repentant, he held the door for me and dropped the sexist remarks. Once inside the elevator, I let out a sigh. Today began on the wrong foot, and it didn't need to get any worse. A bit of explanation for my snappish attitude might be in order. "Michael," I stared at the bottom of the door. "This case is getting to me. I don't know why, but it is."
"It's getting to all of us," he admitted. "Bombers are a scary, disturbing lot. Particularly this one, since we have yet to determine what he wants. Anonymous explosions scream terrorism, whether it's one homegrown lunatic or an entire international sleeper cell. There's the possibility for mass casualties, hysteria, panic."
He maneuvered around to stand in front of me.
"That's why it's our job to keep it together. Can you keep it together, Agent Parker? Because someone's got to think calmly and rationally about things if we have any hope of stopping these sick, twisted bastards."
I stared into his brown eyes. This was the first time I ever felt so overwhelmed and helpless since becoming a federal agent almost 5 years ago. Carver and I graduated from Quantico together, and eventually, we were both assigned to the OIO, a division of the FBI. After completing our 2 years of training, we had worked numerous cases from forgeries to bank robberies to arms dealing. Currently, we were investigating a local car bombing. There had only been one incident, but based on the crime scene, the bomb had been planted intentionally in a public place, just outside the courthouse. However, it had been inadvertently thwarted by a highly astute meter maid who reported the illegally parked vehicle and had it towed to impound, where it had done nothing more than blow the nearby vehicles sky high. It was dumb luck that had prevented dozens of casualties and fatalities. The motivation behind the car bombing would have been questionable if a threat hadn't been delivered to FBI headquarters after the explosion, warning of another impending attack. The ominous words declared this one would not be as easily avoided. We were on a collision course for destruction and death unless we pooled our resources and identified the bomber and the target. At the moment, we had no solid leads. Assuming this wasn't a bluff, we were running out of time. The uncertainty of our success seeped into my subconscious, affecting my sleep and everything else. Self-doubt and fear were my enemies. I'm afraid of the price of failure. I bit my bottom lip, hoping Carver would say something reassuring.
We won't fail.
He tried to play it off as a joke, but he was scared too.
You and I both scored off the charts. We've closed countless cases and impressed everyone around here with our superior deductive skills. The only reason we haven't cracked this one yet is to give someone else a chance to play hero, right?
In that case, I'll sit this one out, and you can play hero. Maybe afterward I'll even let you demonstrate some of those extracurricular stress relief techniques of yours. It was a joke, but it's what we did to avoid the seriousness of the situation. It was our coping mechanism, and one that many in the law enforcement community exercised on a regular basis. To work a job like this, you had to find a balance from the harsh realities that existed in the dark underbelly of society.
Empty promises. But on the off chance you're serious, I'll consider it added incentive for finding a lead.
He winked. The elevator doors opened, and SSA Mark Jablonski spotted us as we exited the elevator. Our boss didn't look happy.
Parker, Carver, conference room, now,
Jablonski barked, pausing after each word as if it were its own sentence. That was never good. We followed him into the room and took a seat at the table. A dozen agents were already inside discussing the forensics team's findings concerning the makeup of the bomb and the materials used for the detonator.
The residue found does not match the chemical composition of any military-grade incendiary device, or any that are manufactured or used by any governments or private corporations that we are aware of,
said Agent Sam Boyle.
The bomb was homemade, and by someone who knew exactly what they were doing.
He called our attention to an image of what was left of the detonator.
Although it was almost completely decimated in the explosion, our technical team has reconstructed what they believe was the detonator switch.
The image on the screen changed to a computer rendition.
There was a built-in fail-safe and a timer. On the bright side, it doesn't appear the bomb had a remote trigger. So assuming he sticks to the same signature, if this happens again, we should be able to disarm it without the bomber being able to cause a premature detonation. The problem is,
Jablonski took over the briefing,
it also means the bomber doesn't have to be anywhere in the vicinity. The unsub values his own life. He's smart and calculating. We can't expect him to make any stupid mistakes, so we have to be on top of this.
Closing my eyes for a second, I didn't feel on top of anything. Carver was right. I needed to get my shit together. All I needed was a decent night's sleep to give my mind and body time to regroup. Was that too much to ask? Boyle began handing out assignments as he divvied up the list of materials used in the bomb. If we could figure out where the items were bought, then we might be able to identify the bomber. Half the agents left the conference room to begin locating suppliers. Another group of agents was assigned to scrub the surveillance footage from where the car had been prior to its impoundment. There was a chance the bomber might be identified from when he planted the bomb. The last few agents, including Carver, were sent to locate the owner of the vehicle and determine why someone would want to blow up his car.
Parker,
Jablonski said as everyone filed out of the room.
You've barely left the building in the last 3 days, ever since we received notification of the explosion. So what have you got?
Not a damn thing. Mark sat on the edge of the conference table and propped a leg up on one of the chairs. He wasn't about to accept that as a valid answer.
None of it makes any sense. And if it does, I can't see it, I said.
Okay, let's just talk it out. What do we know?
The car belongs to Douglas Hayes, an assistant district attorney. It was parked in one of the reserved spots in front of the courthouse, and from the copy of the ticket, it remained in that spot for almost 4 days. After the permitted 72 hours, the city was notified of the violation, and the car was towed to the police impound lot. 6 hours later, at approximately noon on Thursday, the bomb went off. Based on the blast, it is estimated there was enough explosive inside the car to take out a 30-foot radius.
If the vehicle wasn't moved, it would have taken out nearby pedestrians, possible motorists, and other parked cars. What else?
As far as I can see, it would have been a random act of violence. I shook my head, hoping to knock something important loose. I checked the court's docket. There weren't any high-profile cases on the schedule. Noon is in the middle of the day, and since judges tend to stay in chambers to enjoy their lunch hour, the likelihood the explosion was meant to target one of them doesn't seem very likely. And given that Mr. Hayes hadn't moved his car in days, how could anyone assume with certainty he'd return on that day and time to his vehicle? I got up to pace. Could the target be the courthouse and not any particular person?
It was too far from the building to cause any structural damage.
Maybe it's a political statement.
All right, let's get back to the facts and stop with the conjecture for a minute.
That's all I've got. I stopped pacing and slumped back in the chair. Mr. Hayes hasn't been to court in weeks. He's on vacation, according to his assistant, and he hasn't been assigned any new casework by the district attorney. None of this makes any sense.
If Hayes hasn't been to court in weeks, why was his car parked outside the courthouse for the last 4 days? How did it get there?
I don't know. There wasn't any way to determine how the car got there, or who drove it when the only thing left was a charred metal heap. It wasn't like it could be dusted for fingerprints. Jablonski looked like he had an idea as he stepped away from the table.
Let's go, Parker.
2. Jablonski and I stood in the small office of Mr. Hayes' assistant, Martha Reed. She was on the phone with someone and would periodically hold up her pointer finger in a "wait just a moment" gesture, and then continue to scribble notes on the legal pad in front of her. If she held up her finger one more time, I might have to make a similar gesture of my own. As we waited, Mark caught my attention and cast his eyes toward the door. Catching his drift, I whispered some excuse and left the office. Hayes' office was across the hall, so I leaned nonchalantly against the door and turned the handle. But it didn't budge. Didn't the prosecutor trust anyone? Wandering the hallways, I hoped to find someone more helpful than Miss Reed. The problem with these legal types was they were always busy, bogged down with paperwork, clients, or booze. Occasionally, a combination of all three. Eventually, I ended up in the copy room. An intern, or paralegal, worked the machine as she collated stacks of paper and cursed under her breath. "Excuse me," I said, causing her to jump.
"You must be the new temp,"
she responded automatically.
"This place has been insane since one of the ADAs took a leave of absence. I don't see why they aren't looking for a temporary replacement for him instead of hiring more of us to handle the research for his current caseload and expecting us to keep the other prosecutors up to date on everything. Had I known this was the amount of work I'd be doing, I would have become an attorney myself."
"Miss?" I pulled my credentials and flipped them open for her to see. "I was hoping you wouldn't mind telling me more about Mr. Hayes."
"Great. Now they expect me to deal with the cops, too."
Correcting her would only lead to further irritation, so I let it slide.
"What do you want to know?"
She continued collating and stapling. "What's your name?"
"Courtney Dupree, paralegal to the ungrateful and self-righteous."
And I thought I was having a bad day.
"Sorry."
She flicked her gaze to me.
"I'm a temp. The agency sent me here 2 weeks ago. I only met Mr. Hayes once. He was going out the door as I was coming in, and he spilled coffee on my blouse."
Laughter seemed like a strange response to have in accordance with that type of recollection.
To make up for it, he hands me a $20 bill to cover the dry cleaning costs, apologizes, and walks away. The joke was on him, since I only own wash and wear.
He sounds like a nice guy.
Sure, I guess. I've never seen him again.
She grabbed the final sheet of paper from the copy tray and finished stapling.
You were probably hoping I would be more helpful.
I shrugged. Do you remember anything else about that day? What he was wearing or driving? If he seemed panicked or in a rush?
It's been 2 weeks, and it wasn't like I was paying that much attention. He had a great smile.
She looked a little sheepish.
I guess he was probably wearing a suit or a sports coat, and he seemed fine. Normal. Just like everyone else. Maybe a little preoccupied since he did bump right into me, and less of a jackass than most, seeing as how he gave me cash for the coffee stain.
He's a lawyer. Maybe it was consideration, so you wouldn't sue him. She picked up the stack of papers and headed out the door. Perhaps she was too busy to laugh at my attempt at levity. Can you point me to someone who might know Mr. Hayes a bit better? I asked. She came to a complete halt in the middle of the hallway.
Martha would be your best bet. She's his assistant. Why are you asking about him? Did he do something wrong?
His name has surfaced in regards to a current investigation. I repeated automatically. This was one of those lines I could utter in my sleep from overuse. Thank you for your time, Miss Dupree. She continued down the hallway, and giving up on my pathetic attempt at snooping, I went back to Mrs. Reed's office to see if the woman had concluded her phone call, or if Jablonski ripped the jack from the wall. Frankly, sir, if you want information on any of Doug's current cases, you'll need a court order or permission from the district attorney. Reed's voice traveled through the closed door and could be heard in the hallway. Going back inside, I shut the door and stood near the back wall so as not to interrupt. Apparently, Jablonski was questioning her on upcoming trials and hearings. Fine. He pulled out his phone and made a call. He had a lot of professional acquaintances in a lot of different places, and it wasn't surprising that he had the DA's number saved in his phone. He gave a brief explanation and hung up. A second later, Reed's phone rang, and she answered, provided a couple perfunctory answers, and put the phone in its cradle. Happy? Mark asked. Here's the list of pending trials and corresponding court dates for the days and times you requested, she said. Since the information was already prepared for us, it made no sense why she tried to give us the runaround. I didn't like it. Turning his back to her, he scanned the sheet and looked at me, hoping I would take over. Mrs. Reed, do you have any idea where Mr. Hayes went, or how long ago he made these arrangements? I'm not his keeper. I have enough to do here. Does Mr. Hayes have a family, or a significant other? It'd be incredibly helpful to have some insight into his private life, I said. This is my job. This is a place of business, not some sorority house. She fixed me with a hard stare. You should realize how important it is to exercise professionalism. If he didn't tell me, then I didn't ask. Her attitude seemed cold and detached, but when she spoke of him, she referenced his first name. There had to be a familiarity, despite her comments. My gut said she knew more than she was letting on. Of course, ma'am. Thank you for your time. I gave her a smile and headed for the door. Turning back to her, I asked, when's Doug supposed to return from his absence? He didn't say. Betrayal flickered across her face. He didn't bother to tell me he wasn't coming back. It's not like I've been his assistant for years. Always on top of things, making sure not to cut any corners, and that all the rules are followed to the letter. She sounded bitter. 2 weeks ago, he says goodnight, as he did every evening, and that was it. The next day, I was scrambling to get another ADA to cover for him. He didn't even have the courtesy to tell me to make preparations for his absence. Did he ever do that before? I asked. No, but I got an email the next morning saying he was taking a sabbatical and to pass along his caseload. No one questioned it, so I figured he must have spoken to the boss about it. I haven't heard from him since. Who knows what's going to happen to me or my job if he doesn't come back? Nodding, I continued out the door.
Get anything useful?
Jablonski asked as we left the building. Not really. I stopped, reconsidering. I spoke to a temporary assistant, Courtney Dupree. She said she was called in the same day Hayes left. She also said they've been requesting quite a few temps to help with research to make up for the shortage of attorneys.
It looks like Hayes planned to leave all along, even if he didn't bother to inform his assistant,
Jablonski said. I leaned my forehead against the glass window as we drove back to the OIO. Our leads are so far-fetched right now. Hayes might not have anything to do with the explosion. I mean, seriously? Who blows up their own car?
Parker, we work this case just like any other. You're trying to jump ahead because of the ticking clock. But keep in mind, just because some asshole calls in a threat, it doesn't mean it's real. It also doesn't mean we should be sloppy. We go where the evidence leads. Sometimes it takes us to a dead end. And sometimes it goes straight to the person responsible. Right now, we don't have enough to do anything else. This is square one.
There has to be more, I argued. Something has to be there. He gazed at me for a long moment, probably too long for someone driving a car.
This might be it. We work with what we have and hope it's enough. Either it will lead somewhere, or it won't. We can't always stop things from happening.
That was something I wasn't willing to accept. If a train was speeding toward you, there had to be some way to stop it. We knew it was coming. Now all we had to do was locate the emergency brakes.
I don't like it either,
he said after a time.
I'm not saying we should throw in the towel, but you've been at this since we got the call. Tonight, you're going home early. Fresh eyes and a clear mind work wonders.
Okay, for once, we were in complete agreement on the insane hours I tended to keep. 3. Arriving home, I phoned in an order for Thai food, showered, and changed into something comfortable. The wheels in my head were turning around the explosion. ADA Hayes' sudden disappearance, and the comments Courtney Dupree and Martha Reed made. Where is the freaking off switch? I grumbled, turning on the television and channel surfing for a pointless distraction, stopping on a movie that touted shirtless men with supernatural abilities. I reached for a notepad and started constructing a timeline surrounding Hayes' sudden leave of absence. I just added the run-in with Dupree when there was a knock at my door. "You're not Thai food," I said, sounding slightly disappointed. "Glad to see your observational skills aren't suffering." Carver entered my apartment without invitation. "By the time I got back, Jablonski said you went home for the night." He gave me a look. "What gives?" I needed a break and some distance. Mark agreed, or suggested it. At this point, I'm not sure which is more accurate. Carver took his jacket off and wandered into my living room. He picked up the notepad and read my scribbles before dropping it on the couch cushion. "This is what you call taking a break?" He sat down and stared at the TV. "I've seen this movie. Is it the second or third? Either way, they all turn into werewolves at the end." "Michael, why don't you come in and make yourself comfortable?" I remarked. "Sure, thanks." He unhooked his gun from the holster on his hip and put it on my end table. "I figured you'd be burning the midnight oil and thought you'd like an update on what we uncovered today." "You could have called." "True, but we both work better with visual aids." He picked up my notepad as if to demonstrate his point. "So this made more sense." He made an obvious pretense of looking around my apartment. "Unless I'm interrupting something. Maybe a date or a meeting with a male prostitute." I glared at him. "Female prostitute?" I made a disgusted sound, and fearing for his own safety, he cracked a smile. "Take it easy. I was only teasing. I thought you might like some company. If you don't want to talk about the case, we don't have to. Or I can go. No hard feelings either way." Before I could answer, there was another knock at the door. This time, dinner arrived. I paid the man and brought the cartons into the living room, dropping them on the coffee table. "I might have been overzealous in my ordering. I'd like you to stay for dinner, and we can go over whatever you and the other guys found today." "Just stop with the quips. I'm not in the mood." He smiled, appearing as if he just won some kind of prize. "Okay, Alex. Thanks." He picked up the plastic utensils as I selected a carton of noodles.
leaving him 2 other options to choose from. One of these days, I would learn to order one thing at a time. But on the plus side, leftovers often lasted through the week. "We couldn't locate Douglas Hayes," he said around a mouthful of shrimp. "Sam and I checked his house, spoke to a couple of his neighbors, pulled his phone records, and talked to his friends and family. The guy disappeared." "What'd we get on the bomb materials and the vehicle?" "When I left, they were still trying to identify the suppliers, but nothing was out of the ordinary. My guess would be the bomb could have been constructed from the products they sell at any hardware store. We have a few experts from the PD's bomb squad checking for a signature on the detonator. The real kicker is the footage we have of the car prior to its impoundment." The suspense is killing me. Leaning back against the sofa cushion, I curled my legs underneath me, too worn out to pace. "From what we can tell, the guy who dropped off the car in front of the courthouse resembles Hayes. It might even be him. We are working on angles and facial recognition right now. But suffice it to say, it doesn't appear anyone else approached the vehicle except the meter maid and the tow truck driver." Carver put the carton on the table. "The problem is..." He chewed on the inside of his lip for a moment, thinking. "We ran Hayes' credit cards to try to locate him. He bought a bus ticket 2 weeks ago for Indianapolis, and there hasn't been a bit of financial activity since then. Either Hayes was our bomber, or someone with a slight resemblance was. Any possible ideas what his motivation would be? Assuming Douglas Hayes is behind the explosion and threats? Disgruntled employee, or a worker drone disenchanted with the entire legal system. Aren't we all? And if it isn't Hayes, we need to determine who had access to his car. Were there any signs of tampering?" Michael looked at me as if I were insane. "Right. It blew up." I rubbed my eyes. I guess that means I really do need a break. I tossed the notepad on the coffee table and settled into the cushions. Closing my eyes, I added, "Talk me through your thought process. Have you reached any conclusions?" "Besides the fact you're suffering from sleep deprivation and have horrible taste in movies, I think Hayes might be our guy. No one drops off the face of the earth. Maybe he needed to take the leave of absence so he could build the bomb. It's not like he's an engineer." "But if you're planning an attack and you don't want to get caught, you don't plant the bomb in your own car. You don't dramatically change your routine. And you don't leave it parked someplace you know it's going to get towed away." I opened my eyes and studied Carver. "That's it." I smiled as the light bulb came on. "The target wasn't the courthouse. It was the impound lot. But how'd he know the vehicle would get towed there?" "A good guess." I shrugged. "But why target an impound lot? It seems contradictory to the follow-up threat we received." "Unless..." He grabbed his phone. "What if the explosion was to throw us off the scent of something else?" He finished dialing as I tried to process what he said. Like what? It made no sense, but he ignored me as he waited for whoever was on the other end to answer. Eventually, he hung up. Damn it. I wanted Boyle to get a manifest of the other impounded vehicles. Maybe one of them was used in the commission of another crime, and the police haven't made the connection yet. An explosion would detract from any other pending investigations. Apparently, I'm not the only one who needs sleep. Your speculation sounds like a conspiracy theory. Do you have any better ideas? He asked, and I shut my mouth. We were getting closer in our assumptions, but we needed facts to support the beginnings of this new theory. It was almost 8. In 12 hours, I'd be back at work. He turned around to see what I was looking at. Okay. Tonight, we'll leave the investigating in the hands of our capable co-workers. And tomorrow, we'll see if anything they uncovered supports my theory. Okay. Now, do you want to finish watching the movie? I think there's another 40 minutes until they all turn into werewolves. Sure. Mindless drivel is precisely what I need right now. He found the remote and put the TV back on as I grabbed the throw from the back of the couch and got more comfortable. As the movie played, it became apparent the only saving grace it possessed was the shirtless men. The forced dialogue and overacting droned in the background as my mind tried to wrap itself around Carver's newfound theory. At some point, I fell asleep because when I opened my eyes again, My head was resting against his shoulder, and the sun was peeking through my blinds. Sitting up, Michael opened his eyes and stretched.
"What time is it?"
he asked. I don't know. 7, maybe? I blinked a few times to clear the blurriness from my vision. 7:15, I confirmed. Shit. We're supposed to be at work in 45 minutes. Why didn't you wake me last night?
"Oh, sure. Blame me. I'm not the one who fell asleep on your shoulder."
He went into the bathroom and shut the door while I set the coffee maker to brew and got changed in my bedroom.
"Do you think anyone will notice I'm wearing the same clothes from yesterday?"
he asked as he went past my room. Loose the tie and keep your jacket on to hide some of the wrinkles. I finished dressing and opened the door. I'm sorry. You should have woken me. I went into the bathroom and shut the door. By the time I came out, Michael was halfway through a cup of coffee. He holstered his gun and folded the blanket on my couch. He looked like he had been putting in some long hours with his 1 day's worth of stubble and dark circles underneath his eyes. But that wasn't anything out of the ordinary for a federal agent.
"You said you haven't been sleeping lately, so I wasn't about to sabotage your only opportunity to get some rest."
Sometimes, the jackass could be a sweet guy.
"Thanks for the coffee."
He took a final sip.
"I'll see you at work."
4. I arrived 20 minutes late. Jablonski didn't say a word as I snuck into the back of the conference room and caught the tail end of the briefing. The bomb-making materials had been tracked to 2 local hardware stores. If the bomber paid with a credit card or check, we'd have solid ground to stand on. The DA's office sent over Hayes' employment records because he was currently our only person of interest. Agents were evaluating his caseload to determine if the ADA's sudden disappearance had anything to do with an upcoming case. Right now, we assumed Hayes was the bomber, or someone he pissed off was. Right before everyone was dismissed, Carver spoke up.
"Parker and I reevaluated the circumstances surrounding the explosion, and we think the intended target was actually the impound lot."
It wouldn't hurt to check into that,
Agent Boyle said. Prior to their reassignment at the OIO, Boyle had been Carver's supervisor at the LA field office. Jablonski nodded.
Since it's your idea, why don't the 2 of you go make friends with the local Leos and see what they have to say?
No one else wanted to go to the precinct and step on the police department's toes. The PD didn't like us, and this would probably make things worse. Pissing contest, here we come. This seems like a much better idea last night, I mumbled, signing a sedan out of the motor pool. Do you have any cop friends you can ask for a favor?
"I don't spend my time with cops,"
Carver said, illustrating exactly why 2 branches of law enforcement couldn't get along.
"But I'm sure they won't have a problem. Bombings fall under federal jurisdiction."
Wow, someone's an optimist. I turned the key in the ignition.
"Hey, maybe it's because I got to sleep with you last night."
He chuckled, but I remained silent, driving out of the parking garage faster than necessary.
"You know,"
as he continued his diatribe, he began to sound more sincere.
"We're trained to be on alert all the time. Every minute of the day, we might be expected to report in because of some crime or catastrophic event. The training and muscle memory become our default settings. Back at Quantico, they knocked out our casual, relaxed attitudes. So it's no surprise when everyone ends up wound tighter than a ball of yarn, especially when we're led to believe another attack might be imminent."
I felt his eyes on me, but kept mine trained on the road.
"It's that constant unease that was keeping you awake. Last night, you had the opportunity to let your guard down because someone was there, watching your back."
His words caught me by surprise, and I turned to look at him.
"Confession time,"
he admitted.
"Since we've been investigating this case, I haven't slept more than 4 hours straight through. I bust your balls, Parker, but I get it."
Don't you dare start saying crap like that. I'd hate to have to like you. You've been the bane of my existence for so long. I pretended to shudder. My God, are you trying to make hell freeze over? He laughed, and for the first time in days, the job didn't seem quite as burdensome and isolating. I pulled to a stop at the crime scene tape surrounding what was left of the impound lot and got out of the car. Finesse. The plan was finesse. We approached the uniformed officer standing guard to keep the looky-loos away. Displaying my credentials, appeared the federal agent badge with a warm smile.
That was quick,
Officer Militao said as his gaze shifted from my photo identification to my face.
We only called your office 10 minutes ago.
Excuse me, sir? Maybe I was overdoing the politeness. But it couldn't hurt. But what are you talking about?
The body. Homicide's been here all night, but they just got the results back on the dental records. Officer...
Carver stepped forward, reading the man's name tag, but not attempting a pronunciation.
Can you direct us to the detective in charge?
Militao pointed his finger to a man standing in the midst of the rubble, and Carver lifted the crime scene tape.
After you,
he said to me. Thanks, I said to the cop as I ducked under the tape. Grabbing Carver's arm, I whispered in his ear. Did you hear anything about a body at this morning's briefing?
No, but if they just called, it's probably running around the circuit board at the office. I'll bet you 20 we end up getting a call before we finish talking to the detective.
You're on. Detective Jacobs was in charge of the scene. The impound lot looked like a junkyard after a massive fire. There were dozens of scorched vehicles. The initial blast had set off a few additional explosions as shrapnel and flames pierced the gas tanks of nearby cars and trucks. Honestly, the remnants looked like a scene out of an action movie. I stared at the destruction, amazed the damage had been reasonably contained. Carver and Jacobs discussed the scene, but I couldn't concentrate on what they were saying. When I returned to reality, Jacobs was gesturing to a nearby van.
I guess you can understand why it took us so long to locate the body.
He attempted a smile, but it didn't make it any further than his lips.
One of the cleanup crew found him yesterday afternoon, when they attempted to move that derelict. The ME had to run dental records, because he was too well done for anything else.
Resisting the urge to cringe at the crude comparison, I remained silent so he could finish the summation.
We've scoured the rest of the area, and tore everything else apart. There was just one body. Preliminary suggests he was dead long before the explosion, since he had a bullet lodged in his chest.
Who is he? Carver asked. Jacobs flipped open his notepad and skimmed the sheets before answering.
88 Douglas Hayes. God damn it if someone on our side didn't get killed for fighting the good fight.
This is an elaborate way to conceal a murder, I said. We need records on the van, when it was brought in, who it's registered to, everything you have.
My guys are already running down leads. I'd be happy to pass along our results,
Jacobs said. Look, the explosion is federal jurisdiction, and your DB is in the center of our crime scene. Don't you think it might be in everyone's best interest to share? We can work conjointly.
You want to catch a murderer?
Carver chimed in, since we were taking turns playing nice.
We want to stop a bomber. Our goals might not lead to the same person, but it'd be foolish to think they're unrelated.
He spun in a circle to ensure a panoramic view of the lot.
The most important thing is to make sure this doesn't happen again. I'll get copies of everything we've found. Photographs. Preliminary reports.
Jacobs narrowed his eyes at me.
We'll share, but make sure you extend us the same courtesy if you make any headway on identifying the murderer. Thanks, pal.
Carver extended his hand.
You got it.
Detective? I nodded once, acknowledging his request and handing him my card. I hope you'll be in touch. On the way back to the car, Carver dialed our technical team and informed them of the incoming information. They could decide if they wanted to evaluate the scene themselves, or if the PD did a decent job of cataloging everything. After he hung up, I glanced at him. You owe me 20.
Damn it. I shouldn't have believed a word that officer said.
Despite our banter, the reality of the situation set in.
At least we found Hayes.
He's dead. We have no suspects, no leads, and all the work we've done on finding Hayes in the hopes he was our bomber was a total waste of time and resources. Fuck. I slammed my palm against the steering wheel. Now what are we supposed to do?
It's a start, Carver insisted. Relax. If the intent of the bomber was to disguise the murder, then maybe there won't be any more bombings. This might be a single isolated incident.
From your lips to God's ears. 5. Our priorities concerning the investigation shifted. There was no reason to focus on locating Hayes. He was cooling his heels in the morgue. We were still trying to determine if Hayes drove his car to the courthouse, or if he planted the bomb. Although that seemed completely convoluted given that he was dead and the threat was issued post-mortem. Then again, we had to explore all avenues. Purchase histories from the hardware stores resulted in a dead end. The items were bought almost 3 weeks ago with cash from one of the 2 stores. When we requested security footage from the store's CCTV, we learned they only maintained a digital copy for 14 days before the files were deleted. One of our windows of opportunity just slammed shut.
Carver and I are going back to the DA's office,
Boyle announced, entering the conference room where we were camped out.
We'll question Hayes' co-workers and see if they have alibis for when his car was left in front of the courthouse. With any luck, maybe someone will have something useful to say, particularly now that he's dead.
Jablonski looked up and nodded. We should have been more thorough, but we didn't know that at the time. All right. I went to the whiteboard we were using to diagram the progress we were making on the investigation. Where are we on identifying the car's driver?
We've input what we have into the facial rec software, but it's not much. There weren't enough points of reference. We requested the data from the dot cams. Backtracking, we might be able to determine where the car came from. It might be the only way to identify the driver,
one of my fellow agents said. Selecting a marker, I scribbled several questions on the board. We needed to identify Hayes' killer, the car's driver, the bomb maker, and a possible next target. As I leaned against the table, I absently chewed on the marker cap while I studied the post-explosion photos.
Here, Parker.
Mark shoved a file box in my direction.
That's what the police department sent over. I know you've been itching to dissect it, so have at it.
Thanks. The rest of the world blurred into nothingness as I separated the information into relevant categories such as crime scene, bomb materials, Hayes' remains, and miscellaneous items. By the time I finished sorting and updating the board, I was the only person left in the room. Enjoying the solitude, I sat on top of the table and examined my handiwork. Hayes' time of death was estimated to be between Sunday morning and Tuesday afternoon. The explosion occurred Thursday at noon, and the car was left in front of the courthouse on Monday. We needed to narrow the TOD window if we wanted to clear Hayes as the bomber. The rest of the scene was a mess of twisted metal and charred materials. Upon a secondary analysis, the bomb might not have been as powerful as we originally thought. The gasoline in the car, combined with the gas tanks from surrounding impounded vehicles, made the blast grow exponentially. It was a wonder the entire lot didn't go up in smoke. Focusing on the courthouse parking lot, I noticed the vehicles were spaced farther apart, and the parallel spots limited the chances of setting other cars asunder. If the car had not been moved, the explosion would have been smaller, but innocent bystanders might have been killed or maimed. Either way, it seemed like a lose-lose. And since this line of thought was neither here nor there, I returned my focus to our current theory. The explosion may have been designed to conceal Hayes' murder. But why? The ballistics report insisted the bullet came from a .38 caliber handgun. Based on the trajectory of the shot, it was fired from above. Perhaps the shooter was standing at the top of some steps, or on a balcony when he shot Hayes. Or Hayes was lying on the ground when he was killed. The striations were being run through the databases for a match to other crimes. But as of yet, the weapon hadn't been identified.
You're still here?
Carver asked, coming into the conference room. Where else would I be? Any leads on identifying Hayes' killer?
One of his most recent cases, a murder charge against Forrester Klein, got thrown out for improper procedure.
Carver took a seat on top of the table next to me and studied the whiteboard.
Hayes had the files and evidence locked in one of his desk drawers. He also hired a private investigator to tail the guy.
That seems like stalker behavior instead of due diligence.
Sam's checking into it now, but I'd say Klein seems like a good bet. Speaking of which, he reached into his pocket and fished out a 20. Here. I took the offered money and shoved it in my pocket.
Thanks.
Why would an ADA still be investigating a closed case? Do you think they were gathering additional evidence to bring the guy up on other charges, or in conjunction with another case? Carver thought through the potential ramifications each answer held. He squinted into the distance and got off the table, flipping through the box of Hayes' pending casework. Finding whatever he was searching for, he smiled brightly. I gotta talk to Boyle. He dashed out of the conference room. I'll just wait here and continue to feel useless, I announced to the empty room. Normally, I was on the ball, but this case left me flummoxed. Being stumped wasn't something I enjoyed. Shaking it off, I climbed down from the table, scribbled a few final notations on the board, and went to my desk to wait for Carver or Boyle to come back with something definitive.
Okay, everyone, listen up, Boyle said. It seems our man, Hayes, was working on something off the books. Right now, we don't have any proof this is what led to his demise. But dimes to dollars. I'd say it's a reasonable assumption, until it's proven otherwise or something else occurs. We're keeping tabs on Forrester Klein. I've forwarded copies of his arrest record and Hayes' investigation to your inboxes. Get familiar with Klein, and tomorrow morning, we'll work out an assignment schedule to maintain round-the-clock surveillance on our newest person of interest. Until then, he glanced into the empty conference room. Continue what you're doing. We need to identify and locate the bomber before anything else goes up in flames.
Forrester Klein had been arrested on a first-degree murder charge, but was released because the search warrant wasn't properly filled out and signed. Everything the police recovered, including the murder weapon, was fruit from the poisonous tree and thereby inadmissible in court. Shit like this happened more often than it should, but it was the only way to attempt to create a fair judicial system. The theory was men like Klein would commit another offense, and as long as protocol and procedure were followed, the system would eventually win out. As the old adage goes, you don't bet against the house. After the charges against Klein were thrown out of court, ADA Hayes began investigating Klein in conjunction with some conspiracy charges. As I read the scanned PDFs of Hayes' files, I realized the district attorney's office was in the process of compiling an extensive case against a homegrown militia group thought to have a stockpile of illegal weapons. The militia group was comprised of only 3 brothers, Tim, John, and Frank Farlow. Each was an outspoken anarchist, opposed to the government and everything it represented. The gun Klein allegedly used in the commission of his crime traced back to the militia group. The rest of the file detailed the selling and trading of weapons and munitions by the Farlow brothers. The DA hoped to add conspiracy and accessory charges before bringing a case against the Farlows. The state didn't want to have to dismiss another case without solid, irrefutable evidence. That read as motive to me. Either the Farlows or Klein got wind of Hayes' investigation and decided to pull the plug. Going so far as to blow up the man's car might be construed as a warning. However, if the explosion was a warning and not intended to conceal a crime, then why the cover-up? Why put Hayes' body in the back of some van that might have only accidentally been blown sky high? Anyone have any information on the van they found Hayes' remains in? I asked. A couple agents shrugged, but one of the more astute members of our team responded. It's registered to a delivery service, Bates Movers. She clicked a few buttons on her keyboard. They're a small independent service, but at least one of our suspects works there. I leaned over her shoulder as she pointed to a picture with a caption listing their employees. Frank Farlow. I'll be damned, I smiled. How long was the van in impound? According to police records. She clicked to a different window. Since Sunday. A thought gnawed at the edge of my mind. I accessed Hayes' phone records. A few calls came in over the course of the week, but based on duration alone, none of them had been answered since Saturday night. Had Douglas Hayes been receiving threats? Running reverse lookups, I found 17 calls, all lasting less than 5 minutes, from Bates Movers. Since they were placed after the close of business, I didn't think they were related to any moving needs. Aside from the frequency of calls to Bates Movers, there was only one other number that called numerous times over the last month. The number originated from a prepaid, unregistered cell phone. It was also the last number that phoned Hayes on Saturday night. Does anyone have any friends at the NSA who can tell us what was said for 3 minutes on Saturday night between Hayes and the mystery caller? I asked. Most of my coworkers ignored me. A couple shot me dirty looks, and Carver chuckled. Come on. You know they're illegally wiretapping the entire nation. Carver laughed, but Jablonski and Boyle scowled at me. Apparently, I didn't need to take my political commentary comedy tour on the road.
Parker, give me the number, and I'll see what turns up,
one of the IT guys offered. I highlighted the number and brought the copy of the phone log to him. With any luck, we'd eventually identify the caller, determine the reason for the constant calls back and forth with Bates Movers, and figure out who murdered Hayes. Over the course of the next few hours, the IT department determined the location where most of the calls were made. We couldn't narrow it down to a precise address, but it was in the vicinity of Forrester Klein's apartment building. There was a good chance Klein threatened Hayes or lured him into a trap. I let out an exhale as some of the weight lifted off my chest. There was still much more to do, but we had 4 suspects who could be killers, bombers, or both. Going back inside the conference room, I wrote each of their names on our board and everything we knew about them. I stared at the words, hoping for answers and coming up with nothing more than plenty of additional questions. Finally, I created a web overlay detailing the connections which reinforced my conclusion that we were on the right track, and then I called it a night. 6. The next morning, I was ready to dive into the investigation, but as I exited the elevator, I found Jablonski standing at my desk.
Don't get comfortable,
he warned.
Fill your thermos and let's go.
Knowing better than to ask what was going on, I grabbed my travel cup from my bottom drawer, filled it with coffee, and met Jablonski at the elevator.
There's an empty storefront across from Forrester Klein's apartment. You and I are staking the place out. With any luck, this chucklehead will do something incriminating, and we can nab him.
What about the Farlows? I asked as I followed Mark to the car.
Boyle and Carver are set up in a surveillance van outside Bates Movers. We have another mobile unit on standby, prepared to follow if any of them leave. We're going to divide and conquer.
Have there been any additional threats from the bomber? Chatter? Anything? Perhaps I was raining on our parade with my pessimistic attitude.
Not a word.
We fell silent as he maneuvered through the city.
We're trading off on 8-hour shifts. 3 teams.
He glanced at me.
Cheer up. I brought cookies.
He grinned, and I laughed.
Plus, we're lucky. There's indoor plumbing.
Awesome. Stakeouts typically meant calculated bathroom breaks and limiting the coffee and liquid intake. That wasn't going to be a problem this time. 3 days in the drafty, dilapidated storefront, and the indoor plumbing no longer seemed like such a great perk. Patience? Stakeouts were about patience. The radio chirped, and Jablonski grabbed it from the card table we set up, along with a couple of folding chairs.
Sir, we've received verification of a second bombing. Agents are en route now.
The location was a restaurant across the street from the municipal building.
First responders on scene found the explosion completely contained in the storage room. No injuries or fatalities to report.
What the hell? I muttered. Why plant a bomb where it couldn't hurt anyone? Was this about making a statement, or was the body not found yet? Just like with Hayes at the first scene.
I'm on my way. Have the police cordon off the area. And don't let anyone leave.
Mark ended the radio transmission.
Parker, you're keeping eyes on this son of a bitch. He knows something, and I want to know exactly what that is.
He picked up the radio again.
Boyle, have there been any changes in the Farlow's behavior?
Negative.
Have someone from the standby unit rendezvous with Parker at this location. I'm going to the explosion site, and I don't want any of our agents to lack backup when it comes to surveilling murderers. Copy that. Someone's on the way,
Boyle promised.
If something happens before your backup arrives, Radio for police assistance. Do you understand?
Mark spoke as if I were a child. I nodded, and he threw one last look across the way to Klein's apartment before exiting the back door. 20 minutes later, the door opened, and being overly jumpy, my hand went to my gun as I heard a familiar voice announce, "Pizza delivery!" You didn't want to spend another 6 hours inside the surveillance van? I asked Michael as he dropped the box on the table. At least he wasn't kidding. Tossing a questioning look his way, I wondered where he found pizza at 10 o'clock in the morning. Opening the box, I grabbed a slice, took a tentative bite, and made a face. "Not good." He picked up a piece. "It came from a convenience store. Ready to eat. Just microwave." "It tastes like soggy cardboard." He bit into it and put the rest of the slice back in the box. "Guess we can toss this." After spending another hour staring across the street into the curtainless windows of Forrester Klein's apartment, Carver and I unknowingly managed to consume almost half of the pizza. Boredom always resulted in horrible decision-making. Michael rubbed his face and shifted in his seat. "Do you want to get some shut-eye? Because we can trade off on watching Klein. And if something occurs, I'll wake you up, or trip over you, on my way out." I smirked. "Nah." He shook his head and picked up the styrofoam cup of coffee. "I'm fine." He inhaled and sighed heavily, putting the cup down without drinking. "Can you believe there was another bombing? We got the threat. We assessed the situation. We've been investigating leads and motives and," he gestured to the window, "conducting surveillance, and there is still another explosion? This is fucking ridiculous." "Tell me about it. Don't forget to address the elephant in the room. Since we've been keeping tabs on Klein and the Farlows, that means we have no leads on the bomber. None of them could have done it, unless we didn't notice. And I'm sure we would have noticed." I paced the space from the table to the window, my eyes never leaving Klein's apartment. The guy was a damn homebody. "No, there's no way they aren't connected. It's the only thing that makes any sense." It could be a random lunatic. It happens. Defeat didn't look good on me, but I was tired, cranky, and ready to do something besides stare across the street at the flickering television lights. "Or," he leaned back and bit his thumbnail absently, "what about a delivery? Postal service or a package, maybe? Couldn't the bomb have been sent instead of being planted?" I guess. The only thing I knew was the explosion occurred in the storeroom. If the device had a timer and was delivered to the restaurant, could it have been mistaken for another parcel and fortunately placed in the back? But it's just theory until we hear something concrete from Jablonski. The silence was filled with frustration as we continued to hope something more substantial would occur at Klein's apartment. 20 minutes later, the bedroom light flipped on, narrowing my eyes. I checked the time. Something seemed off. "This guy is like a fucking ghost," Carver said. "I haven't caught a glimpse of him once. No wonder you're so bitchy. You must be bored out of your freaking mind being stuck here for days." "I don't think he's home." I stepped closer to the window. We haven't seen him at all. I picked up the log sheet from the other two shifts. They had both seen the guy in person, coming home or going out, since there were requests for a mobile team to maintain visual contact with the subject. "We have the only exit in our sights." Carver checked the building's blueprints. "He can't honestly be a ghost. From what I know, ghosts can't kill, and Forrester Klein is definitely a killer." He got up and stood next to me at the window, touching my arm gently. "Getting him off the streets is a priority, so we have to play this by the book. I know how you can get." I chuckled. "You're one to talk." Together, we bent the rules a couple of times. Sometimes because of sheer ignorance, and other times because something needed to be done. But if he never does anything incriminating, what are we going to do? How can we just sit around drinking coffee and eating crappy food while we wait for more bombs to explode? As if on cue, the radio chirped to life.
"Parker, respond."
Boyle's voice came through staticky. I picked up the radio and affirmed my presence.
"Frank Farlow should be arriving at your location momentarily. The mobile unit followed him. He just parked a block away from Klein's apartment. Monitor the situation from your location. The mobile unit will continue to tail Farlow. If Klein exits the apartment, you and Carver will need to maintain a visual in the event the two subjects split up. Do you copy?
Aye, sir. I tucked the radio inside my jacket pocket and checked my gun. Looks like our stakeout might turn into something a bit more exciting. It's about damn time, Carver said. Farlow entered the building, and less than 2 minutes later, he and Klein exited the front door. Apparently, Klein had been home the entire time. Carver spotted one of our agents casually walking up the block in pursuit of the two men. Looks like it's showtime, he said as we exited the back door and hovered nearby, waiting for the two men to pass. Michael put his arm around my shoulders, and I turned into him so he wouldn't seem as conspicuous. That was one of the few perks of partnering with a male agent close to my own age. We had tons of practice selling ourselves as a couple, and as predicted, the men went past without any hesitation. After they were half a block ahead of us, we strolled after them, allowing the other team to leapfrog with us to prevent alerting our suspects. Farlow and Klein entered a laundromat 3 blocks away, so Michael and I entered a boutique nearby and browsed the racks closest to the window to maintain a visual. One of the other agents went around to the back of the laundromat to make sure our suspects weren't going to elude us by slipping out a back door and exiting into the alley. "Can I help you?" the clerk asked. "Federal agents, ma'am." Carver covertly flashed his credentials. "Please step away." She obliged, slightly frightened. "I'm so going to use that the next time I go shopping," I whispered, cracking a smile. 5 minutes later, Farlow and Klein exited with a medium-sized package. The radio in my pocket chirped, reminding me I forgot to silence it. Thankfully, it didn't go off when we were outside. The other agent radioed in the circumstances, and Boyle gave the go-ahead for a takedown. Maybe a decent defense attorney would argue this was circumstantial, and we didn't have enough proof to make an arrest. But considering that only hours earlier a bomb detonated in the back of a restaurant, we weren't going to wait around for another explosion. The two agents keeping tabs on Farlow approached and announced themselves before Carver and I even exited the boutique. Both men ran. Farlow kept a tight grip on the package. With any luck, the other team would stop him and secure whatever might be inside the brown cardboard box. My thoughts went to the possibility of a bomb, and I shuddered to think what would happen if it went off out in the open. Carver, as usual, ran ahead of me as we chased after Klein. From our suspect's trajectory, I felt confident he was going home. We continued after him, but he made it inside the building and up the stairs before we could apprehend him. "Second floor, 3rd from the right," I shouted to Carver as we began our ascent. We drew our guns and slowed our pace, not sure what to expect. When we reached Klein's apartment, the door was wide open, but there was no sign of Klein. "Mr. Klein, we're federal agents. Come out slowly with your hands up." Carver braced himself against one side of the door jamb, and I took up the other. "Mr. Klein, we know you're in here." Still nothing. I cautioned a glance around the door. "Bedroom?" I mouthed to Carver. He shrugged and tried again. When we still got no response, I took a steadying breath. "Cover me," I whispered, and slowly entered the apartment. The bedroom door was open, and I approached silently. I leaned around the frame. No one was inside. I shook my head, but went in to make sure he wasn't hiding in a closet or under the bed. Clear. Michael stood outside the closed bathroom door. The rest of the apartment had been checked, and it was the only place left for Klein to hide. "Mr. Klein, come out now." I strained to hear, but there was no sound or movement. Leaning against the jamb, Michael held up his fingers for a countdown. When he got to 1, I turned the doorknob as he raised his gun and stepped forward into the room. The only sound I heard was a loud click. 7. Against the bathroom wall was a motion sensor attached to an incendiary device. Right now, the sensor was green, but as Michael fidgeted, it let out clicking sounds and briefly flashed red. "Alexis, get out of here," he swallowed, holstering his gun.
I'm not leaving you. Let's both just take a breath, and you need to stop moving. I crouched down to examine the sensor Michael inadvertently tripped. Listen to me. I stood up and stared into his eyes through the mirror's reflection. Since his back was to me, it was the only way we could see one another. I'm going to radio for assistance and get someone from the bomb squad down here to deactivate that thing. Until then, you aren't going to move a muscle. I'll be right back. Having a barely workable knowledge of detonators, I knew stray radio signals could cause a premature detonation. But leaving Carver standing on top of a bomb wasn't something I wanted to do either. Okay. Call it in, and then stay out there. No reason we both need to be blown to bits. My God, you'll do anything to be a hero, won't you? I attempted to joke, but my heart hammered mercilessly in my chest, and my hands shook uncontrollably. Don't go anywhere. Hey. His tone stopped me in my tracks. Be careful. We don't know where Klein went. You're one to talk. I went into the hallway and radioed Boyle, requesting immediate assistance. He would make sure the bomb squad rushed to our location. In the meantime, I was going radio silent. After turning off the radio and steeling my nerves, I went back inside. I was just thinking, Carver said as I stood behind him. Wouldn't it suck if that piece of soggy cardboard, as you so eloquently put it, was my last meal? It really makes a guy reconsider the things he puts in his body. Michael, as soon as we get out of here, I'll treat you to anything you want. Promises, promises. He smirked, but then his jaw clenched. Don't stand so close. He pressed his lips together in a tight line. And make sure you watch where you step. Just because I found one booby trap, that doesn't mean there aren't more. It's going to be fine, I insisted, hoping at least one of us would believe it. Sirius wasn't helping. All it did was make the situation seem more dire. And just think, I was relieved not to have to apprehend the perp with the cardboard box for fear that could be a bomb. It's ironic how things work out. How much do you want to bet the cardboard box held nothing but the guy's laundry? If you put 20 on that, you're on, Michael said. He fell silent, and I tried to come up with something positive to say. When I attempted to meet his eyes, I noticed his were screwed shut, and his shoulder blade was twitching. There are some things I'd like to discuss, he began, opening his eyes and sounding resigned to whatever his fate may be. Tell me later. No. The fear in his brown eyes shocked me. Just in case. I want to do it now. First of all, this has been one hell of a ride. Don't you fucking dare. If this is the kind of shit you're going to be sputtering, then I'll wait downstairs for the bomb squad. Alex, in the event. Have them tell my mom first. She's a strong lady. And inside the locked safe in my bedroom closet are copies of my personal files. The Bureau will want those. I nodded. Next to the bed is... he began, but seeing a perfect opportunity to lighten the mood, I interrupted. I'm sure Sam or Mark will clear out your porn collection, I teased, and I caught a smile. But just for my own clarification, they aren't going to find any crazy shit like S&M gear or some fluffy suit. Damn, what are those people called? My mind went blank, but hopefully, the banter would keep him focused on more positive things. You know, the ones who dress up like giant stuffed animals to screw. Stuffies or fluffies. Plushies, he chortled. Is this your way of confessing to it being your kink? I don't have any kinks. You're the one with a closet full of porn, S&M gear, and a plushie suit. You do realize you're absolutely insane, right? He asked. I shrugged, and his reflection smirked at me. Only a lunatic would stand inside an apartment with a ticking time bomb. You're not so bad. Sure, you get moody sometimes, but I've learned to ignore it, I teased. Alex? His tone was back to serious, and I rubbed a hand over my face. Make sure you get these bastards. I promise. Before either of us could say another word, I heard the sound of sirens getting louder. Stay put. Help has arrived. By the time I made it to the ground floor, officers were clearing the building. The bomb squad arrived, and Boyle pulled up.
Agent Parker,
Boyle called as he got out of the vehicle.
fill us in.
I told the group of bomb technicians everything I knew. One guy nodded, donned the heavyweight protective gear, and went into the building to evaluate the situation. We lost Klein, I said. He was too far ahead of us. And when we reached his apartment, we found the door open. We assumed he was inside, but he wasn't. I guess he opened his door and continued running. The fucker completely threw us off the scent. I shook my head, and now Carver is standing on top of a bomb.
This isn't your fault.
Boyle looked nauseous.
Frank Farlow was arrested with a box full of plastic explosive. It's stable since it wasn't attached to a detonator. But this is the smoking gun we needed.
He stepped closer and lowered his voice.
At this moment, I couldn't care less if that psycho makes it out of interrogation alive. We'll find out how to deactivate the bomb upstairs, and what other targets these fucking yahoos are planning to hit. For once, I'm actually in favor of the Patriot Act, and deeming someone an enemy combatant.
Can I call dibs on the waterboarding?
We'll take turns,
he said. Clearly, we were both worried about Carver. Most of the time, the risks associated with this job seemed minimal or reasonable. For example, the risk of being shot could be minimized by wearing Kevlar, or I could decrease my chances of being caught by surprise by going over advanced hand-to-hand combat maneuvers. But how were we supposed to prepare for situations like this? There was no way to control the situation or the outcome, and that was one thing I would never accept. 10 minutes later, the bomb tech came outside. The building had been cleared, and a few of his team members followed him inside with various tools and equipment. As Sam and I waited, praying to whatever entity might be willing to listen, Jablonski's SUV screeched to a stop a few feet from us.
Where's Carver? What's the status of the bomb? Do we have an update on Klein's location?
Michael's still upstairs. The bomb squad is... I faltered slightly. They're upstairs, working on deactivating it. Klein's in the wind. He got away from me. He tricked us. That's why Michael is where he is. I was starting to lose it. Damn it. I swore and kicked the tire on Mark's SUV.
Agent Parker, go back to the office. Review the information on Frank Farlow and get whatever information you can out of him. There is work that needs to be done. And you standing here isn't helping anyone.
Jablonski pointed to the open driver's side door on his SUV. I don't want to leave Carver.
I wasn't making a request. Get to work. You don't need to be here.
Obeying his orders, I climbed into the SUV, shut the door, and drove back to the OIO, unwilling to consider the possibility of what might be happening inside the apartment building. 8. Listen up, you son of a bitch. I circled the table like a shark. Your actions scream terrorism, and you are one phone call away from being sent to Guantanamo. Unless you want to avoid becoming some camel jockey's bitch, I suggest you answer my questions to the best of your ability. Frank Farlow glowered at me with disdain.
I'm the only true patriot in this building. I'm taking a stand and protecting what our forefathers worked so hard to create, and you can't do a thing about it.
You want to bet? Where's Forrester Klein?
Who?
I slammed his face into the tabletop. He screamed in pain and sat back, blood running down his face.
You broke my fucking nose.
That's just for starters. Exhaling and loosening up my shoulders, I stood in front of him. Where's Forrester Klein?
I don't know.
He leaned down, trying to stop the bleeding with his handcuffed hands.
And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you.
Did you sell him explosive devices, or any other weapons? The cameras were off, and no one was watching from the observation room. Boyle had given me the go-ahead to treat our captive as an enemy combatant, which greatly limited his civil rights. Although bashing the guy's skull in might still be questionable. Violence only sought further violence. But God help him if Carver didn't make it out of that apartment in one piece. Right now, I needed Farlow to fear me.
The Second Amendment gives us the right to bear arms.
Did you provide him with any explosive devices? I asked again, my patience thinning. The brief look of glee that passed over his bloodied features was enough of an answer. What did you give him?
Oh, you'll see.
The asshole smirked. Putting on a pair of gloves, I went behind his chair, grabbed his short, greasy, brown hair and yanked his head backward and gave his nose a hard squeeze, refusing to let go.
Shit!
He cursed and attempted to wriggle out of my grasp. He was handcuffed to the bar in the table, and his chair was bolted to the floor. He wasn't going anywhere.
Help! Someone! Help! Get this crazy bitch off of me!
But my fellow agents, Michael's friends and colleagues, wouldn't take pity on this excuse for a human being. Answer my question, I growled in his ear.
Plastic explosive and instructions on making pipe bombs and lead bombs?
He frantically exclaimed.
Now let me go.
What about the sensor in Klein's apartment? How can it be disarmed?
What?
He genuinely sounded confused.
I didn't give him any sensors. I just gave him the basics.
Why? For what purpose? My jaw clenched. I believed he didn't know anything about the motion sensor detonator, which meant Klein was acting on his own.
Forster wanted to take care of some problems.
I released the pressure on Farlow's nose, and he winced, walking around to the other side of the table. I stared at him, waiting for some elaboration.
He was wrongly accused, and the state was harassing him. They were following him, tapping his phones without just cause. He was being set up, framed for a murder he didn't commit. And the sickest part is this nation claims to be protecting its citizens, but it's completely subverted from what it was intended to be. Only the true patriots can understand what is constitutional. You stand there with your badge and gun, claiming to have some authority over me, but you have none.
This guy was a nutbag. He had a lot to say, particularly when it came to ratting out Klein's motives and maybe explaining the circumstances surrounding Hayes' murder. But I didn't want to go near any of that. That needed to be on the up and up, and I already tainted my interview with violence. How much explosive did you give Klein?
Enough for 3 small bombs. He wanted more, but...
Farlow shut his mouth, and I knew the rest of the explosive he wanted was in the package we confiscated. Slamming my chair against the table and jarring my captive, I stormed out of interrogation, stopped the first person I found, and told him to send someone to get our suspect cleaned up after he accidentally hit his nose on the table while trying to strong-arm his way out of the cuffs. I had gotten everything I could out of him, and there was no reason why the man needed to make a bloody mess in our interrogation room. It wasn't very sanitary for any future persons of interest who might be forced to sit in the same chair at the same table. Back at my desk, I made a few calls to get arrest warrants signed for the other 2 Farlow brothers. If their family militia group was buying and selling explosives, we had reason to bring them in for questioning. After issuing a bolo on Forrester Klein, I went to talk to the mobile unit that brought Farlow in. They said the package was left in an out-of-service washing machine, which must have been used as a drop. They already pulled the laundromat's video surveillance, and were hoping to identify whoever left the plastic explosive for Farlow. Just as I picked up my phone to call for an update on Carver's situation, the elevator doors opened and out came Jablonski, Boyle, and Carver.
Are you sure, kid?
Jablonski asked.
Yes, I want to nail these bastards,
Carver said. Jablonski nodded once, clapped him on the back, and went into his office. Boyle threw an arm around his shoulders and whispered something to him. Carver grinned, and Boyle went into the conference room, calling the 2 agents from the mobile unit to join him. Hey! I launched myself into Michael's arms. You're okay. I'm sorry for leaving you there, and everything.
It's okay.
He hugged me back.
Careful, Alex. People might think we slept together,
he whispered teasingly in my ear. Jerk. I filled him in on everything that transpired while he spent the afternoon standing around in Klein's apartment. We have some strong leads. Someone else will have to do the follow-up interview, but we're making progress. Are you sure you don't want to take the rest of the day off?
Nah,
but I have a few things I need to take care of while we wait on the other 2 Farlows to be brought in.
He glanced at the rest of our team.
Thanks for having my back. Can you do me a favor and stay on top of whatever breaking news is going on with the earlier bombing from today?
Yeah, no problem. I gave him a strange look, wondering what he had to do instead.
Great. You can read me in over dinner. I'm thinking surf and turf. After all, you did offer to buy whatever I want.
Apparently, I should have been more concerned with my pocketbook than your well-being. He snickered, and I grabbed a notepad and headed for the conference room. Charts and dozens of pictorial representations of the explosion from this morning covered a cork board someone had pushed into the conference room. Jablonski came in and asked that we all take a seat. For once, our fearless leader also sat instead of standing as he gave us the update. Today had taken a toll on him too. The cause of the explosion was the result of a package bomb. The restaurant was expecting a shipment of jarred pickles, and the box thought to contain them had been unopened and left in the storage room. The photos of the scene indicated scorch marks, broken glass, and charred wiring. To the untrained eye, it looked similar to the detonator remnants used in Hayes' car.
Our team is going over the scene and checking for leads on who sent and delivered the package.
Jablonski locked eyes with each of us.
I'm sure everyone's aware of this morning's situation. Agent Carver is fine, but it is imperative we locate and apprehend Forrester Klein. However, if any of you end up in pursuit, feel free to exercise extreme prejudice in taking him down. I'm not willing to risk any of our lives for his apprehension.
No one was opposed to these more stringent measures. If you fuck with one of us, you fuck with all of us. A junior agent opened the conference room door. Sir, John and Tim Farlow have been brought in for questioning.
Thanks, Cooper,
Mark said. After Cooper left, Mark surveyed the room.
Okay, we'll let them stew for a few minutes. In the meantime, I need everything you can get on the 3 Farlow brothers. Forrester Klein, and anyone who might be able to give us some answers. The more ammunition we have against them, the better off we are.
He stood up.
Parker, I need a minute.
I followed him to his office. He waited for me to take a seat, and then he shut the door and sat on the edge of his desk in front of me. Boyle said I could exercise some creativity, I began, but Mark held up a hand to silence me.
I don't care what happened with Farlow, or how it happened. It doesn't matter.
He swallowed and blew out a breath.
But you're not going anywhere near him or his brothers. Whatever we get out of him might be the key to putting Klein behind bars for the rest of his life, and nothing any of us do should jeopardize that. I was told he broke his own nose while fighting against his restraints. No one can contradict that, so we're keeping this as the official story. Understood?
Yes.
Good.
I got up to leave.
And Parker, we protect our own, even if the methods we employ aren't always particularly sound,
Mark said. It wouldn't have mattered. He didn't know anything about the motion sensor or how to disarm the bomb. If... I looked away and began again. I regret my actions.
Then don't do it again.
He jerked his chin toward the door. Under different circumstances, I would have been suspended, pending an investigation, and possibly charged with assault. However, Carver's life had been hanging in the balance. So desperate times and all that. It didn't make it right, but it did make it understandable. 9. In the last 6 hours, much of our case had fallen into place. We still hadn't located Klein, but if Farlow was correct in the amount of plastic explosive Klein possessed, there were no other targets. Bomb number 1 went off inside Hayes' car. Bomb number 2 went off early this morning at the diner across from the municipal building. And the 3rd bomb was rigged to a motion sensor in Klein's bathroom. Perhaps Klein was the innovative type and researched how to rig an explosive to a motion sensor without asking his supplier for assistance. Too bad he didn't accidentally blow himself up. That was just wishful thinking on my part.
Hey,
one of the techs said, and I opened my eyes to find him standing over me.
I just got into Hayes' voicemail box. You need to listen to this.
I took the offered thumb drive and plugged it into my computer. There were countless threats from Klein to Hayes, dating back almost a month. Each message became more heated than the last, until Klein finally threatened to kill Hayes. More specifically, he threatened to shoot him in the heart. "Did you pass this along?" I asked.
Yes, SSA Jablonski and SAC Boyle both have copies.
He retreated from my desk, and I checked the call logs and cross-referenced the number. The prepaid burner cell's timestamps on the phone log matched the voicemail messages left by Klein. We had him for first-degree murder. We also had him for an attempted bombing, and I was certain by the end of the night we'd have him for the detonations at the impound lot and the diner. Picking up the phone, I dialed Detective Jacobs and shared the newest development on his homicide case. It was only fair. The police department tossed Hayes' apartment and found the original crime scene. Hayes had been shot on the landing of his fire escape. From the looks of his apartment, there had been a struggle, and Jacobs determined the ADA tried to escape his attacker by going out the back. Unfortunately, Klein had come prepared and shot him from the level above.
Agent Parker, we've been reviewing the security tapes from Hayes' building. The shooter is Forrester Klein.
Jacobs muttered barely audible expletives.
I guess it's a toss-up to see if the state or federal government indicts first.
The state's got the death penalty, so just make sure you have a damn solid case. An eye for an eye would make the whole world blind. But it was hard to act enlightened or evolved when shit like this kept happening. Every day, there was another serious threat, whether it was a mass shooting, explosion, or some other multi-casualty event. "Parker?" Boyle called, and I went into his office. "Tim and John Farlow are hoping for immunity if they cooperate. How much insight do you think they possess? You're probably the best judge after your chat with their brother, Frank, this afternoon." "Sam?" I wanted to rip my hair out as the day continued to weigh on me. "I have no idea." "Farlow. Frank Farlow?" I specified. "Seems to be the ringleader. From the things he said, he's all about his doctrine, and proving himself to be a real patriot. I'd say from what we witnessed today, and the things he might have mentioned, he's running the show. He sold the explosive. He explained to Klein how to use it, plant it, and detonate it. From their records, the three Farlow brothers reside together. They work at Bates Movers together. They probably masturbate together for all I know." He waited for my rambling to ebb. "Okay, I'll see if we can cut them a deal. The problem is they're all accessories to an ADA's murder. That tends to grate on the nerves of both the DA's office and the U.S. Attorney's office. It might be a hard sell." "Obviously. Our jobs aren't supposed to be easy." I rubbed my eyes. "Do we have any idea who's supplying Farlow with weapons and explosives?" "Tim and John are offering names if we deal." Boyle studied me. "Alexis, you look like hell. Grab a hold of Carver and get out of here. He should have taken the rest of the day as a personal day instead of sitting at his desk being profoundly morbid." I cocked an eyebrow up. "He spent all afternoon writing out specific instructions in the event of his demise." Damn it, I'll see what I can do. I was ready to go home. My partner had almost been blown sky high. I had assaulted a handcuffed prisoner, and I wanted the party responsible to be executed by the state. At the moment, I was so far beyond cynical and jaded that I was bordering on apathetic with homicidal tendencies. Granted, I heard of agents burning out, but never within a matter of 16 hours. No, today we had to celebrate life. And tomorrow, whatever was left to be handled could be handled. "Alex." Michael glanced up from whatever he was doing. "Is something wrong?" "Yes, and I need you to come with me." "Just give me 10 minutes. He looked confused, but I wasn't about to waver. Yes, I was a workaholic who could easily spend the entire night working this case. But it wouldn't be good for my mental stability, or Carver's. Occasionally, I needed to prioritize. Fine. I went to my desk, turned off my computer, tacked every new lead and theory to the board in the conference room, and collected my belongings. Michael grabbed his coat and met me at the elevator. Boyle sending us home for the night.
Don't argue. I'm starving, and I promised you dinner. I reached into my pocket and found a 20. Probably the same 20 he gave me. Oh, and you were right. The box didn't have Farlow's laundry in it. You really shouldn't bet against a surefire thing, he said. On the way down to the parking garage, his cell phone rang. He turned away and answered. Hi, Mom. I'm glad you called back. He paused, and I wish we weren't stuck in a tiny metal box so he could have some privacy. No, everything's fine. I just wanted to see how you're doing. How's Dad? I fumbled through my purse, looking for my car keys. I should go. A friend is taking me out to dinner. He paused. Yes, a lady friend. I love you too. Bye. He disconnected and caught me looking at him. Alexis, don't look at me like that. Like what? You know like what. I'm fine. I'm glad. I led him to my car and unlocked the doors. After both our doors were shut, I turned the key in the ignition. I broke a guy's nose today. Thank you. It wouldn't have helped. He didn't know how to. I stopped at the traffic light, waiting for it to change to green, and pausing as I did in the hopes of figuring out what I wanted to say or what needed to be said. Deactivate it. He didn't know anything about it. Alex. I'm sorry, Michael. I turned to him. I was supposed to have your back, and I couldn't do anything to help you. My jaw clenched tightly, and I faced forward again, hitting the accelerator the moment the light changed. Carver remained silent. Maybe he blamed me. Or maybe I was just adding my own fears to his. After the silence became unbearable, I cleared my throat. So, where do you want to eat? 10. Carver and I had lobster tails and steaks for dinner. It was the surf and turf he wanted, and I didn't begrudge him the price. After we finished eating, we ended up at a dive bar a few blocks from his apartment. It was where he'd go occasionally to have a drink and seek out some non-OIO company. Allowing me to join him was probably sacrilege, but I was buying. Michael was a bourbon guy, and it seemed easier to order the rounds and twos, even if I didn't particularly care for the stuff. Although we spent the last 2 hours alone together, I couldn't remember who spoke last, or what was said. Talking wasn't one of my strong suits, and he shut himself off from the world. He finished his third drink and flipped the glass upside down. Mine had barely been touched. You have to know it wasn't your fault, he said out of the blue. You and I have been through a lot. He snorted. Damn, if that's not an understatement. Right now. He shook his head. I don't even know what I'm doing. Can we get out of here? Yeah. I tossed some cash on the bar. Whatever you want. I just want to go home. We left the bar. My car was parked almost halfway between the bar and his apartment building, so as we got closer to my vehicle, I slowed my pace. I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Come with me. I could use a friend, he insisted. Michael, I don't want to see your plushie suit. I smiled and gave him a friendly nudge. The silence returned for the next 2 blocks as we made our way to his apartment. He unlocked the door and ushered me inside. He had a small 2-bedroom apartment. There was a good chance my 1-bedroom apartment had more square feet than his, but I couldn't be sure. Like I mentioned earlier, my personal case files are in my bedroom closet, but this computer has copies of all the reports I've compiled for the OIO. Inside the locked drawer is a list of passwords. The key to that drawer is on my key ring. He reached into his pocket and brought out his keys. It's this one. He had 5 keys on the ring. This goes to my car. These 2 are for the apartment. I just showed you the one for the desk. And this is for the lockbox in my closet. Michael, stop. I begged. We are not doing this. You're okay. Today was just a bad day. And what if one day it's more than a bad day? He looked away. Someone needs to know what to do, just in case. I don't want to be that someone. He ignored me and continued listing where things were and what to do. Please stop. I've written out specific instructions in case anyone has questions. They're in my bottom drawer at work.
He was scared, and this was the only way he could take back control.
It's just in case. Don't worry about it, but just know it's there.
All I want is for you to be there. I couldn't stand it any longer, and I hugged him, holding him tightly. At first, he stood completely rigid, but eventually, he caved in my arms. One of his hands got tangled in my hair, and the other forced me closer. There was no telling how long we stayed in that embrace. Neither of us was willing to let go or pull away. At some point, our grips loosened, and we both withdrew. Leaning forward, I kissed him. It was gentle and meaningful, and then I stepped back. It was one bad day. Do not let it get inside your head. We deal with shit all the time. This is nothing new. Even I didn't believe it. Everything Carver was doing felt like tying up loose ends and putting his affairs in order. His foundation had shifted, and it frightened me to think what that could mean. The next day at the office was business as usual. Maybe a good night's sleep gave Carver some perspective. He returned to his normal workload and routine habits instead of spending his day writing out worst-case scenario instruction manuals. I compartmentalized and stuck everything from yesterday into a neat little box at the periphery of my psyche. It didn't matter that I assaulted Frank Farlow or didn't make as much progress on the case yesterday as I should have. I was chalking it up to a bad day. It was over now. It was tomorrow, and my energy needed to be focused on locating Klein and following up on our new leads. "Sir?" I knocked on Boyle's open office door. "What happened with Tim and John Farlow?"
"They got immunity,"
he said, nonplussed.
"I just sent 2 agents to bring in their supplier. The police department is canvassing the area and checking for eyewitness accounts on Hayes' murder."
He cautioned a glance at Carver, who had just gone into the conference room where most of the team was working.
"He seems to have pulled himself together. How is he?"
"Honestly, I have no idea." Boyle assessed me.
"And how are you?"
"I'm ready to close this case." He jerked his chin toward the conference room, and I went back to work. Inside, everything had been updated, and our theory board was in practical working order. Most of what we knew was no longer unsubstantiated conjecture. It was simply what happened. Frank Farlow posted his anti-government rhetoric all over the internet. He designed websites, blogs, and social media pages that shouted what he interpreted true patriotism to be. He chastised the government for taking control of our lives, illegally monitoring us, and requiring licensure for what he dubbed every aspect of our civil rights. Like I determined upon my first encounter with the man, he was a nutbag. Even if any of the arguments he made were solid, there was a right way and a wrong way to go about doing things. And clearly, his way was the wrong way. His outlandish claims filled every part of his life. His brothers did his bidding, but as far as we could determine, they weren't the instigators. They seemed passive and possibly even in denial about the lengths Frank would go for his cause. Even his co-workers at Bates Movers didn't realize how unhinged and destructive he was. They simply thought he just took every opportunity to spout nonsense from atop his soapbox. It reminded me of the Edmund Burke quote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And briefly, I wondered if Farlow was a fan. It was easy to find justification by spinning words to fit any set of goals. Forrester Klein somehow came across Farlow's ramblings, and given his current plight, the 2 men quickly hit it off. Forrester Klein might have been acquitted of the initial murder on a technicality, but his insistence on seeking revenge and threatening ADA Douglas Hayes made the attorney dig in his heels. After receiving some less than pleasant voicemail messages, Hayes was dead set on finding something that would stick to Klein. My mind scowled at the inappropriate pun. The more Hayes tried to make a case, the faster Klein developed his plan for revenge. Although some details concerning the exact times and dates Frank Farlow met with Forrester Klein were still cloudy, Tim and John insisted there had been half a dozen different meets in which Klein and Farlow discussed ways of getting payback. Farlow's main concern was making a political statement. He encouraged Klein to plant the explosive devices outside the courthouse and at the restaurant near the municipal building. Both places were frequented by government officials, judges, law enforcement officers, legislators, and Hayes himself. Farlow believed he found the perfect delivery system for his message, and Klein would make the ideal patsy. At least now, we had proof the threat we received concerning future bombings had been made by Frank Farlow. However, Forrester Klein didn't care about making a statement. The only thing he cared about was silencing Hayes. The dozens of menacing voicemail messages began almost a month ago. After Hayes received the death threat, he decided to take a leave of absence from work and lay low until the state had an undeniable case. It was what prompted him to buy the bus ticket and disseminate some misinformation about leaving town. Except he didn't leave. He continued to work with the private investigator on finding additional evidence against Farlow and Klein. But since Farlow was willing to take the heat on the bombings, Klein decided there was no reason to wait before silencing the nosy ADA. From what was revealed during the follow-up interview with Farlow, Klein had gotten impatient, went to Hayes' apartment, and killed him. It was a game of cat and mouse, but I couldn't help but wonder if Hayes had just let Klein's acquittal go, if any of this would have ever happened.
Parker?
Michael said my name, and I looked up at him.
Since it seems we have a handle on Hayes' murder, Jablonski wants us to go through the files once more, and then drop them off at the precinct. I could use some help.
All right. I pulled up a chair, and we began going through the information and making final notations. Neither of us mentioned yesterday or last night, and as I watched Michael work, I was relieved things seemed to be back to normal. 11. Carver carried the boxes into the precinct, and I asked for directions to Detective Jacobs' desk. Arriving at his cubicle in the Major Crimes Unit, we watched as most of the squad rushed around in a hurry over the latest call.
And I thought things at the OIO were hectic,
Carver whispered in my ear. Detective Jacobs? I called, making the man swivel in his chair. We've brought the information back to you.
Amazing.
He shifted his gaze from me to Michael.
There must be a first time for everything.
He stood and took the boxes from Carver.
Agents, walk with me.
We followed Jacobs down the hallway to evidence storage. He handed the boxes across the counter to an officer on duty, signed the chain of custody form Carver produced, and handed the officer the same form to sign. Handing the duplicate copy back to Carver, he took to leaning against the counter.
Since you've been forthcoming in your investigation, it's only fair for me to tell you we've got eyes on Forrester Klein. Uniforms in the area are keeping tabs on him, and we've sent a couple of black and whites to bring him in.
How'd you find him? I asked.
We've been canvassing the neighborhood where his mother lives. A neighbor spotted him entering her house. When he left this morning, we tailed him.
Jacobs looked smug.
You mean to tell me the federal government can't locate a suspect?
He couldn't resist the dig, but I let it go.
Do you mind if we hang around until he's brought in?
Carver asked. There was a score that needed to be settled, but this was not the time or place for it.
Suit yourself, but it's our caller.
Jacobs faced me.
After all, the state's got the death penalty.
He winked, and I couldn't help the tiny smile that crept onto my face. It was sick and twisted and made me feel disgusted with myself, and yet there it was. Apparently, I needed a vacation. We went into the hallway, and Jacobs left us alone. Once we know he's in custody, we should get out of here, I insisted. Carver was wound tight, like a coiled spring, and he didn't need to stick around. I know why you want to be here, and it's not worth it. He met my eyes, blinking back whatever he was feeling.
You're right, Alex. He's not worth it, but I am. I deserve to know this is over, and that fucking asshole is behind bars.
Silently, we waited in a few empty chairs near booking for Klein and his escorts. I phoned Jablonski and gave him the update. All he said was be careful. There wasn't much else to say. Almost 2 hours later, Klein was dragged into the precinct in handcuffs. I couldn't imagine what Michael must be feeling, but as Klein was shoved past us, Michael remained motionless, watching with a level of disinterest usually reserved for particularly tedious infomercials. That sight worried me more than anything else ever did.
Let's go,
He said, standing up.
it's done.
Why aren't you celebrating? Why aren't you fighting to go bash his skull in? What the hell is going on, Michael? I asked as soon as we exited the double doors.
Nothing's going on. It just feels different. Maybe I feel different.
He opened the car door and got inside.
Come on, we're wasting daylight.
There was no point in arguing. We had a job to do. Since the police had Klein and we had the Farlow brothers, the only one left was the supplier. Boyle said he was being brought in. So with any luck, this case would conclude by the end of the day. Hopefully, all we needed was a fresh start and a new beginning on a different case. It had been a week since Forrester Klein's arrest. The OIO had conducted numerous interrogations with Klein, the 3 Farlows, and the bomb supplier. The police department had a solid case against Klein for the murder of ADA Douglas Hayes. They had eyewitness accounts of Klein entering Hayes' apartment building and sounds of an argument. The building's security cam footage and Hayes' phone records were the icing on the cake. After the murder, Klein called Frank Farlow for help. He had a dead body on his hands and needed someone to assist with the cleanup. Farlow left work with the van, met Klein outside Hayes' building, and dumped the body inside. Afterward, the 2 men went back inside Hayes' apartment, located the keys to Hayes' car, and planted the bomb. While this was happening, the 2 geniuses left the van parked in a tow-away zone. When they returned the next morning to retrieve it and the body, the police already impounded the car. This was the impetus that encouraged the relocation of the car bombing. Originally intended to be a political statement, it was now going to be used as a cover-up for a murder. Additionally, based on what Tim and John said, Frank hoped the police would mistakenly believe the ADA set the explosive himself to illustrate his distrust for a corrupt legal system. But as Frank and Forrester continued to plot and plan, they realized how unrealistic that sounded, and instead, Farlow decided to keep on track with his other target, the restaurant. Klein wasn't going to disagree, especially since Farlow could turn him in for killing an ADA. The plan continued, but once again, fate interfered with Farlow's scheme. The package sent to the restaurant exploded in the closed storage room, not doing any real damage or causing any injury. Frank Farlow failed twice. Thankfully, the only person hurt in this venture was Douglas Hayes, and that had more to do with Klein than anyone else. I rubbed my eyes, staring at my completed report. Right now, search warrants were being signed for Frank Farlow's storage unit. His brothers tattled on him for amassing numerous weapons and other illegal devices. It could only further solidify our case by adding additional charges and more years to the laundry list of felonies and decades worth of prison time Farlow was already facing. Looking across the room, I spotted Carver at his desk, searching for something. He had been off his game since the near miss in Klein's apartment, and I wondered what he was planning to do. Want to grab a drink? I asked.
Not tonight.
Are you planning to engage in some extracurricular stress relief techniques? I asked. He chuckled, looking up and smiling.
That depends on if you're offering.
He was joking, but I couldn't help but think there was a sadness to his eyes. Well, I think we might need to go have a few drinks first. My inhibitions need to be greatly lowered.
Alex, you're such a tease. But in case you aren't kidding, can I have a rain check?
Sure, I replied, wishing he'd speak his mind. Just in case you reconsider, I'll be at my usual watering hole. He nodded. Good night.
Yeah, you too.
I stopped by the bar near my apartment, took a seat, and ordered a soda. Carver didn't show up, and I didn't expect him to. I had no intention of sleeping with someone I worked with, but I thought he might want some company. There were only so many times you could walk away from a life-or-death situation unscathed. 12. The next morning, the warrant was signed for Frank Farlow's storage unit. It was a converted warehouse, typically leased to businesses to house their stock. It was located a mile from the OIO offices, and we had teams checking the area for anyone suspicious. Since Farlow was a fan of guns and artillery, there was the possibility his stockpile might draw the attention of some undesirable individuals. I had barely read over the morning reports when one of the techs summoned me. I followed him into the elaborate room of monitors, surveillance feeds, and communication devices, and he explained the logistics for the current operation. I listened as he went through the placement of surveillance equipment, the location of the warehouse, and the basic layout. Okay, I said, uncertain why I was getting this briefing. Why are you telling me this?
Jablonski said you are coordinating the operation from the office.
Me? This had never happened before. I was always sent out in the field, either to investigate or to surveil, so this made no sense. Just wait a minute. I went down the hall and knocked on Mark's door.
Parker, you're running things from inside today.
Why am I being punished? I asked as Boyle and Carver entered Mark's office in tactical gear.
You're not. But if you think it's beyond your capabilities, then I have some paperwork that needs filing,
Jablonski retorted, checking his service piece and putting it into his holster.
It's IT's game anyway. You're just relaying the go-ahead over comms.
Fine, I said. Boyle gave me a pat on the back.
See, this is what happens when you actually get your reports filed on time, unlike the rest of us.
He tossed a pointed look at Carver, who chuckled.
We leave in 10.
Jablonski announced as he left the three of us in his office while he went to speak to the director. Seriously, what gives? I asked.
Nothing.
Boyle hesitated, glancing into the hallway.
And you didn't hear this from me, but they might be grooming you for a promotion. Try not to screw it up.
He winked and left the office. I eyed Michael suspiciously. Is that why you've been giving me the cold shoulder lately?
That wasn't my intention. I've been contemplating making some changes. I'll fill you in when I get back. And I'll try not to have too much fun without you.
Hey, I stopped him as he tried to leave the office. Be careful. I'm only your telephone operator, so it makes it difficult to watch your back from here. He smirked and went to join the other two men. Blowing out a breath, I went back to the operations room to learn how to run point from off-site. As I settled into the chair, the techs hooked me up with an earpiece and radio, turning the dial to the proper channel so I'd be in contact with Jablonski and his team. While technically this was deemed a raid, it was for evidence gathering. The surveillance teams monitored the area all night but didn't spot anyone in the vicinity. So this was just a simple enter, search, and retrieve mission.
Jablonski thought this would be good practice. Something easy for you to cut your teeth on, the tech said. How long have you been with us, Parker?
Almost 5 years. I shook my head, wondering where the time went. It seemed like only yesterday I was being made a full-fledged agent, and somehow, it was 3 years later. Maybe I'd just been too busy to notice. No wonder I was more pissed off than usual. I hadn't taken more than 2 consecutive days off since I started working. Just wondering why I'm the last one to hear about this advancement opportunity.
No one's offered you the job yet,
the tech pointed out.
This is just a practice to see if you'd be able to handle more responsibility one day.
Frankly, I'd rather be outside the warehouse. The radio made some staticky noises in my ear before the tech adjusted the dial, and I heard Jablonski's voice over the speaker. They just arrived on scene. Boyle and Carver were going around to the back exit, while Mark took the front door. The tech nodded, and I leaned into the microphone. No sign of any activity outside the warehouse. It's been converted into 4 separate units. Farlow's is on the eastern end of the building. From the blueprints, that unit has 2 exits. A single door in the front and a large cargo door in the back. The interior is approximately 2,500 square feet. I reread the warrant to make sure it was filled out for the right subunit within the warehouse.
Are we cleared to breach?
Boyle asked. He chuckled at the absurdity of how seriously I was taking my new duties. "What do you think, Jablonski?" I asked. Mark was still senior, so things like this should be his call.
It's your show, Parker.
Taking a breath, I looked at the tech, trying to determine my thoughts on this new position of power. The monitors in front of us were local traffic cams near the area. They didn't provide a great view, but by squinting and turning to the side, a portion of the warehouse could be seen between another building and a tree. He gave a curt nod. "Affirmative. Move in." Within a second of my command, the radio let out a shrill noise, and static filled the airspace. A dark cloud of smoke billowed onto the edge of the screen. "What the hell happened?" I squawked into the radio and to the tech. Frantically, I tried to get someone to respond, but there was nothing but static. The tech took over, spinning dials and flipping switches. But I was out of my chair and halfway down the hall. I dialed as I ran down the stairs.
911, how may I assist you?
The dispatch operator asked. "This is Agent Parker." I rambled off my credentials as I raced down the flights of stairs, concluding with the warehouse address and a request for immediate support from all emergency services. Reaching the bottom with keys in hand, I sprinted to the car, putting it in gear and speeding from the garage. The warehouse was only a mile from my location, but driving through city traffic was hell. I was on autopilot, and as I screeched around a corner, I briefly wondered how long I had been driving on the sidewalk. The flashing lights and sirens were on, and thankfully, pedestrians leapt out of my way as I flew to the location. I made it to the warehouse within 5 minutes to find fire trucks and ambulances already on scene. The fire department had a station house only 2 blocks from here and responded immediately to my call. Throwing the car into park and bolting from the door, I spotted Jablonski sitting on the concrete as an EMT ran a flashlight in front of his eyes. "What the hell happened?" I asked, relieved to see him alert and functioning. Only then did I notice the dark plumes billowing from what was left of the building.
Those sons of bitches rigged the building to explode.
He tried to push the EMT away.
"Where's Boyle and Carver?"
he asked.
"Oh, for fuck's sake, I'm fine."
He tried to stand, but his balance was off, and the EMT pushed him back into a seated position. "I'll find out," I replied, already circling toward the back of the building as fear overtook my senses with every step.
"Ma'am."
A fireman tried to block my path, so I flashed my credentials at him, not slowing my pace.
"Ma'am."
He tried again as I sprinted toward the back. His job was to put the fire out. Mine was to find my friends. As the rear of the building came into range, I saw a fire truck and 2 ambulances. There was a bloody sheet on the ground, and I found myself racing to it. No, this can't be happening. My mind kept screaming in protest, as if that would change the outcome. "Michael!" I exclaimed. He was on a gurney. 2 EMTs were on either side of him. He was bleeding from his temple, but he seemed alert. "Oh my God! Michael!" I ran to him. "Are you okay? What happened?" He looked distraught.
"Sam opened the door. He had just gotten inside before the blast."
He swallowed. One of the EMTs pushed me out of the way.
Ma'am, we have to get him to the hospital now.
I climbed into the back of the ambulance after Michael, not thinking about anything except making sure he was okay. One of the 2 EMTs shut the doors and went around to the front, while the other strapped Michael in and connected him to a few monitors and started checking his vitals.
"Sam's dead,"
Michael said. His skin looked so pale against the ash marks from the blast. He coughed, and I saw blood. The EMT was stripping the tactical gear off of him, and I clutched his hand. "This is all my fault. I'm so sorry." His eyes started to flutter, and his voice was barely above a whisper. He was saying something, but I couldn't hear him. I leaned closer and felt his lips brush against my cheek.
"It's okay, Alex,"
he insisted. As I leaned away, his body jerked. The warning bells sounded on the medical equipment. and the EMT shoved me out of the way. With the Kevlar off and his shirt cut open, I saw that his torso was covered in deep purple and black.
Hurry it up.
The EMT yelled to the driver.
He's bleeding into his abdomen. Have trauma prepared to get him into surgery as soon as we arrive.
Michael flatlined, and the EMT charged the defibrillator and shocked him. After 2 jolts, the monitor beeped an unsteady rhythm. A moment later, the ambulance slowed. The doors were yanked open, and they carried the gurney out of the ambulance. I didn't move. Boyle was dead, and Carver was dying.
Ma'am. Ma'am.
That horrible word kept repeating as if on a loop, and I jumped when someone touched my shoulder.
Ma'am,
the EMT said again.
They'll do everything they can. Were you at the warehouse when the blast went off?
No, but I should have been. I stepped out of the ambulance on shaky legs and studied the hospital doors. I couldn't go inside, fearing what the outcome would be. As I stood motionless and staring, the second EMT from the rig returned.
He's in surgery, but...
His expression looked grim. He already knew what the outcome would be.
They'll keep you updated on his condition.
I shook my head, fighting back tears. The other agent, Jablonski, any word on him? The two exchanged a brief look.
We'll give you a ride back to the scene,
one of them finally said, acknowledging that I wasn't going to wait inside the hospital for the doctors to tell me Michael didn't make it. 13. The ambulance dropped me off next to Mark's location. By now, the place was crawling with police, fire, and OIO agents. Jablonski was sitting in the back of an ambulance as someone removed debris from his cheek. He looked at me and shoved the man away, stepping down. At least his balance returned. Sam Boyle's dead, I choked out, biting the inside of my lip. And Michael... I stopped and forced my chin to stop quivering. It doesn't look good. He's in surgery.
Parker,
he said my name softly, but I stepped away. Any human contact would cause the tears to spill, and now wasn't the time or place for that.
do what you need to do.
Brushing past all the acronym-emblazoned jackets, I found my car, still parked haphazardly with the driver's side door open and the keys in the ignition. It really must be a crime scene if no one bothered to steal a perfectly good car. On autopilot, I climbed inside and somehow made it back to the OIO. No one said a word to me, which I was thankful for. Everyone heard what happened, and the place was silent. Glancing at my computer monitor, I had no idea how I managed to write my incident report, but there it was. My eyes looked across the room, first at Boyle's empty office, and then at Carver's desk.
Alex,
Jablonski had just arrived. There was a bandage along the side of his face and blood on his collar. But other than that, he seemed fine.
come into my office.
His tone made my heart break, and my breath hitched in my throat. No, I shook my head. Please, Mark, don't. His eyes shone wet, and I went into his office as the first tears that I would shed began to fall. Don't say it.
Alex,
He swallowed and pulled the door closed behind me.
I'm sorry.
He hugged me, and I sobbed, feeling his own tears moisten my shoulder. Eventually, I forced my emotions into check and pulled away from his embrace. This is on me, I declared, opening the door and going back to my desk. I printed my report and went to the director's office. Knocking, but not waiting for permission to enter, I went inside. Sir, after the events of today, I'd like to take full responsibility for what happened to our agents. My chin quivered, and I gritted my teeth, forcing my body to obey simple, rational commands. I hope you'll open an investigation into their deaths. The word caught, but I forced it out. I will be at your disposal for any questioning. Without waiting for a response, I went back to my desk and started a new Word document. When I was finished typing, I saved it on the computer, printed a single copy, placed it in an envelope,
and tucked it neatly into my purse. Giving Carver's desk a final look, I got up. It was almost 8 p.m. Jablonski watched as I left the building. He didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. I screwed up, and 2 agents paid the ultimate price. Somehow, I ended up at the hospital where they had taken Michael. After flashing my credentials, I was directed downstairs to the morgue. After answering a few more questions, I was given access to Michael's body. The assistant pulled the drawer open and left me alone as I looked at his lifeless form. "I'm so sorry, Michael." I kept repeating the words over and over, hoping he'd open his eyes and tell me it was okay. How ironic that the last thing he ever said to me was that it was okay. It was almost as if he'd known. Thinking back, I wondered if he knew all along that something like this was going to happen. Remembering the instructions he forced me to listen to, I wept. The door behind me opened, but I didn't bother to turn around.
"I knew you'd be here,"
Jablonski said, wrapping his arm around me.
"Did you say your goodbyes?"
I nodded, unable to answer, and he gave Michael's shoulder a squeeze and led me from the room.
"His parents are on their way. They should be here in the morning. It's so fresh. But I'm going to move the files out of his apartment tonight so they can have some privacy without us interfering."
Finding my voice, I rambled all of Carver's instructions. We left my car at the hospital, and Mark drove me home. Before I could get out, he grasped my wrist.
"Alexis, right now this won't mean much, but later on, it might bring you some comfort."
He swallowed, keeping his own sorrow in check.
"You're the reason Carver didn't die in an alley 4 years ago. You bought him more time, and he used that time to make countless differences in this world."
It's not fair, Mark. It wasn't enough time.
"It never is."
A tear escaped his eye, and he rubbed it away immediately with the back of his hand. That night, I didn't sleep. The next night, I didn't sleep. Eventually, my pattern turned into crying myself to sleep, oftentimes on the couch. Sam and Michael were dead. There was nothing I could do to fix it, and I would have given anything or done anything to change what was unchangeable. By the end of the week, I had attended 2 funerals, both unbelievably difficult, but each time, I stood completely still, no longer crying or showing any emotion. I managed to turn it off in public, to appear numb. On the inside, the pain and guilt were unbearable. Every day, I went to work and found myself staring at Carver's desk or Boyle's office, waiting for one of them to return to ask me to do something. They never did. While the warehouse explosion was under investigation and my actions on that day were being called into question, largely due to my insistence that this was my fault, I was chained to my desk. It only made the agony and longing for my fallen friends that much worse.
"Parker,"
Jablonski called.
"in my office."
Following him, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the weight of the world on his hunched shoulders, and I knew he was hurting too.
"Everyone in the office is being sent for a mandatory psych consult. I think we're calling it grief counseling. Just a word of advice. Try not to be so surly."
I shrugged, noncommittally.
"By the way, the internal investigation has concluded. You weren't at fault. You didn't do anything wrong. No one could have known. I thought it would be an easy op, which is why I gave it to you. I did this to you."
No, you didn't, I insisted. The rage suddenly boiled to the surface again. What's happening to those bastards who sent us into the building without warning? I snarled, finding it increasingly difficult not to visit the Farlows in lockup and put a bullet through each of their brains.
"They'll get what's coming to them."
He handed me a card with my assigned time to speak with the FBI psychologist, Dr. Weiler. I wish Carver was here, so I could bitch to him about how you think I'm insane. Mark nodded, and I went back to my desk. For the next 2 weeks, I worked from my desk.
Dr. Weiler hadn't cleared me for field work and insisted I continue to meet with him a few times a week. It was pointless since I never felt the need to be forthcoming in any of our sessions. Also, I didn't particularly care for the forced therapy. It was one of the things I despised about this job. "Agent Parker," Dr. Weiler said, and I looked up from the spot on the carpet where I'd been staring. "You have to open up. Mourning is a process. Don't you want to heal? Don't you want the pain to go away?" "No." He looked baffled by my response. "Parker, if you want my approval to go back to work in a full capacity, you have to say something." I was tired of this. Tired of the nagging, the bullying, the picking. I was tired of sitting at my desk, waiting for people who were never coming back. I had grown to hate this job, this man, and the person I had become. The price was too high to pay, especially after Boyle and Carver already paid the ultimate price. "You know what, Doc?" I stood up, angry for being forced to this point. Without it ever being explicitly said, I was given an ultimatum. I don't want to heal. I don't want the pain to go away because it's the only thing I have left of Michael and Sam. I don't need this. And I sure as hell don't need you. I stormed out of his office, hearing him protesting in the background that this wasn't any way for a stable person to act. Who the hell ever said I was stable? I went to my desk drawer, pulled out my purse, and removed the envelope I placed inside the day my friends died. Continuing on my path, setting fire to the bridges as I went past, I knocked on the director's door and waited for permission to enter. Once inside, I handed him the envelope and removed my service piece and credentials. "I quit," I blurted out before he opened the seal. "Agent Parker," he sounded stern. "You can't quit." He launched into a long-winded tirade on how this was a position granted to me by the U.S. government and not some insignificant part-time job. Then he explained how I was a valuable asset and could not be replaced. Finally, when I failed to waver, he buzzed his assistant to get Jablonski. "It doesn't matter," I insisted, "because I quit. There's my resignation, my gun, and my badge. I'm done." "Jablonski, did you know about this?" Director Kendall asked as Mark came into the office, completely unaware of what he was walking into.
"Alex, let's talk about this,"
Mark said, but I shook my head. 2 agents aren't coming back because of me, so there's no reason in this world why I should still be here. Good day, gentlemen. There was no point in arguing. It was what it was, and it was over. I quickly cleared out my desk. Having minimal personal effects made it that much easier, and I threw a final glance at Carver's desk, wishing with all my heart this was a nightmare I would wake up from. 14. My days and nights held no differentiation since I spent all of my time curled up on the couch, flipping through television programs that I didn't have the focus to watch. Occasionally, I would shower, change my clothes, or seek out sustenance, but for the most part, I remained on the couch. It didn't take a fancy PhD to determine I was depressed, and it took even less to determine I couldn't give a rat's ass. Now, whether or not the depression was what made me not give a shit or vice versa, well, some fancy credentials and extensive research might have been required to figure that one out, just like the chicken and the egg. Luckily, I didn't care enough to worry about it. It had been a month since I left my job. Mark would visit or call every few days to check on me and suggest I come back to work. I was stubborn, and I wanted nothing to do with the only career I had ever known. Not only was I mourning the 2 obvious losses, but I was also mourning the loss of the life I had, the one I wanted and tried so hard to achieve. In a single moment, everything changed. Until it happened, I never believed it could. There was a knock on the door, and I sighed, not wanting to be bothered to answer.
"Parker, I know you're in there,"
Mark yelled from the other side.
"I've brought you dinner, and I won't leave until you let me in."
Relenting, I answered the door and retreated to the couch. "I'm not hungry. You should save yourself some time and effort and stop coming by." I'm not suicidal. I'm just sad.
You're telling me?
He snorted.
Look at you. You're just skin and bones. Not like there was much to work with before either. But I swear.
He shook his head, annoyed.
I'm surprised that TV remote hasn't been permanently implanted in your palm.
They can do that now? I asked sarcastically.
No.
He brought over a carton of orange chicken and shoved it into my free hand.
When are you coming back to work?
I'm not. I dug into the carton and ate automatically. No thought went into the process. I resigned.
Like I've said, the paperwork has not been filed. You're on a leave of absence. Hell, you had so many sick days and vacation days accumulated that you can take a few months off without a problem. And since this is a temporary leave of absence, there's no reason not to tack on some extra non-paid days if you need more time.
Mark, I protested, but he put up a hand.
You're acting like a spoiled brat. You're being selfish. Everyone else is getting their ass off the couch and going to work and making a real difference in this world. What the hell are you doing except making a dent in the sofa cushion?
Get out, I snarled, but he wasn't backing down. It turned into a screaming match, and I found myself standing inches from him as we fought bitterly. Go!
Do you think hiding here is going to bring either of them back? Is this what Michael would have expected you to do?
He bellowed, and I slapped him across the face. He took a step back and rubbed his cheek.
There's the Alexis Parker I know.
He grinned proudly.
She would stand and fight, not cower in the corner.
I don't know what to fight for, I admitted. His words jolted me from my self-induced pity party. Not anymore. I can't go back to work. Seeing what was there and isn't anymore. It's too much. It hurts too much. He nodded, comprehending the emotional toll being at the office took.
I have something for you. Carver left it for you, actually. But you weren't ready before. I think you might be now.
As I stood in a daze, he left my apartment and returned 10 minutes later with a small box.
Did you know he was planning on leaving the OIO as soon as we finished the Follow case?
I shook my head, finally understanding what Carver was planning to tell me all those weeks ago.
This was left with all the doomsday instructions he had written. He made it very clear he wanted you to have this, but you better not have been kidding about not being suicidal.
If I was, I'd have done it already, I said, wearily studying the container. By the time I looked up, Jablonski had left, giving me privacy and solitude. Inside the box was a 9mm, almost identical to my personal handgun. It had been Michael's. Next to it was documentation, transferring ownership to me. And there was a note. Unfolding the piece of paper, I took a deep breath and read, Alex, in the event I am no longer your partner, I wanted to make sure you were never left without adequate backup. On our first assignment together, you saved my life, and I hope at some point you feel the favor has been returned. This job has been one hell of a ride. Michael. I spent the rest of the evening cleaning and polishing Michael's handgun and mine. Maybe resigning was for the best. Carver intended to do it, and instead, I was the only one left who could. Something changed, and I felt the shift. Whether it was Mark forcing me to fight or receiving one final message from Michael. I couldn't be sure of the impetus. That night, I slept in my bed, once again reliving the nightmare of the warehouse explosion and hearing Michael's words in my ear, as if he were in the room with me. It's okay, Alex. It was the beginning of getting back to some semblance of okay. Little by little, I started to forge a new normal, although, oftentimes, I still preferred the comfort of sleeping on the couch, remembering falling asleep on Michael's shoulder. Only now, I was starting to take back control of my life. Every day, I spent hours training, running, lifting weights, shadow boxing, whatever. Then I'd spend countless hours searching for jobs in private security. Being a rent-a-cop wasn't a top priority.
but I hoped to find some work as a security analyst, consultant, or investigator. I submitted dozens of applications, but the only time I'd get a response was to say I was either overqualified or underqualified for the position. Money was still coming in on account of my accumulated personal days, but that would end soon enough. Maybe I should do something else entirely. On a whim, I perused the classified section, disgusted with the lack of options and even more disheartened by the number of things I wasn't qualified to do. I had no idea how to be a plumber, a nurse, or how to construct a building. Mark stopped by, as he did weekly. We ate dinner while he spoke about his current investigation, and I complained about my lack of employment options. His eyes held a strange glint, and I waited for an elaboration that never came. He simply shook his head, helped me clear the table, and called it a night. A few days later, he asked if any of my pending prospects panned out. I laughed at the ridiculousness of the question, since I didn't seem qualified to do anything now that I was no longer a government employee.
I know someone who needs some help. He's been receiving threatening phone calls, and there's been some corporate espionage involved, Mark said. I'm not sure it's anything you'd want to handle, but he's getting desperate. Can I pass your name along?
That's what I'm left with, I asked. Maybe I can get a job if you know a guy who knows a guy who's desperate. I shook my head. Sure, he can reject me like everyone else.
It's not a friend of a friend. It's my friend,
he insisted.
Submit your resume to Martin Technologies, and I'll make sure they schedule an interview for you within the week.
Are you sure about this? Now that an actual job opportunity presented itself, I wasn't sure I wanted it. The couch started to look appealing once more, but maybe I was just scared of screwing up again.
Parker, you didn't fuck up here. You're still one of the best agents I've ever seen, and there will always be a place for you at the OIO. But give this a chance. I can't guarantee you a job, but it wouldn't hurt for you to try to get back out there. With any luck, you can resolve this issue for Marty within a couple of weeks. His name will be a great resume booster, and then you can find something permanent to your liking.
Marty?
James Martin, CEO of Martin Technologies.
Mark paused, trying to come up with a better way of explaining who this guy was.
The 50-year-old Scotch I got with my last divorce. That was from him.
What the hell? I replied, resigned to taking this unintended avenue. At least he has good taste in Scotch. Check out Likely Suspects, the next book in the Alexis Parker series. This has been The Final Chapter, written by g.k.parks, narrated by Amber Hinson, copyright by g.k.parks, production copyright by g.k.parks.